Okay. I think we'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Urbana City Council to order right now. It's 7 o'clock, and to that end, I'd like to ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Present.
Mr. Roberts?
I'm here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Ms. Stevenson? Mayor Pressing?
Okay, are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, do we have a staff report? Libby, I think you do, correct?
Three items to report on. You'll, I think it's in a red and white blue sheet, and we have it posted here in the city building. These are public workshops that are being held this week on the Cunningham Avenue beautification study by the consultant CBA landscape architecture firm out of Indianapolis, and they'll be looking for ideas on beautifying Cunningham Avenue from north of the interstate down to University Avenue. The listening sessions will all be held at the Civic Center, which is at 118 East Water Street. On Thursday, there will be two sessions, one at 3 p.m. and one at 4 p.m. On Friday, February 1st, 3 at 11 a.m., 3 p.m., and 4 p.m. And we do ask for RSVPs, but we would welcome participation even without, and further information from community development. The second item, I wanted to point out that we handed out on your dais, fresh off the press, the final Phase 1 report for the Kerr Avenue project. And you'll recall some months ago we did hold a charrette and talked about two different development options for the Kerr Avenue affordable housing and green community project. And there's a lot of additional information in this report. With the publication of this report, we can now move into Phase 2, which will be an issuance of RFP for developers for the project. And we did want to bring this to your attention because as we get into the annual action plan, we'll be including some funding for the second phase. So we'll be providing this to the Community Development Commission tomorrow night at their meeting, and then making a small presentation on it for their February meeting coming up. If you want a presentation, we can certainly schedule that. We can have Jeff Engstrom, who's the project planner, come and talk about the Phase 1 report and Phase 2. We'll schedule that.
It might be good to discuss it so that we get our questions answered now as opposed to later.
Okay. And then the third item is the revised public arts program proposal, and I'll ask Danielle to speak about this piece that's on your dais.
I spoke briefly at our last meeting, I believe, about how this was coming, so now it's here. This is, there were some revisions. I think you got a copy in your packet because you received the packets for all the Public Arts Task Force meetings. This is revised based on Public Arts Task Force input from the last meeting. So the last version that you saw was pre-input, and this is post-input. That's basically the difference. I know that Anna Hohalter is here in the audience. She's our arts coordinator. Anna, can you just raise your hand so council members can see you? So she's a person that you can send feedback to on this. You can also send me feedback, or if you'd like to have a discussion, call me on the phone, email me. The task force decided to basically ask for a few revisions and then put this out to the public, and it will be going to artists that are listed on both the UPA and 40 North and also our city lists. It's also will be available for the public to look at off the website within a couple of days, and the task force meeting will discuss the public's input on this will be Tuesday, February 12th at 7 p.m. here in City Council chambers. That's the Public Arts Task Force. At that point, the task force will make any revisions that it needs to make or deems necessary based on the input, and it'll be sent to the Committee of the Whole meeting in late February. So expect this to come to you in late February.
Danielle, can you highlight any of the substantive changes between the one we got last week and this week, or were they really minimal?
I think
Because they look pretty much, they look
there,
very similar.
it's very close. There were a couple of things like the Public Arts Commission, instead of it being the bottom line for the receipt and purchase and maintenance, we changed it to oversee, that it's not actually responsible for, but it will oversee. I think we did add a section that said we were concerned if the city was not, who would take care of the artwork or help to document the artwork if it's temporal. And so in the Percent for Arts program, we discussed if the city isn't going to kind of, in its general fund, fold in maintenance, then we should look at another 0.5% for maintenance over time, and that would basically be stored in the fund to be used so that we don't come, this is kind of best practices in public arts, that we don't get into a situation where we have something that's crumbling or not being taken care of. I think the school district, park districts, Urbana Free Library, Parkland College were added as specifically as partners. Let's see, I think those are the, I mean, that's not very much substance, but those are some of the things that were changed.
Okay, thank you very much. Other comments or questions for Danielle? Go ahead. Any additional staff reports? Mayor?
Well, I just got back from the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Washington, and the whole focus of their conference was on sustainability. The realization that cities are the ones that are going to have to implement all these programs and try to get citizens involved. The U.S. Conference of Mayors drew up legislation to provide funding for 5 years, and it was modified somewhat in the Congress, and I'll get to that. They haven't done the appropriation yet, but they're going to be doing the appropriation, and they did pass the bill. So I looked at the chart for all the cities, and I realized that it wasn't strictly based on population. It turned out that cities from 35,000 to 50,000 would get $3 per person, whereas cities larger than that would get $6 per person. And this is not how the U.S. Conference of Mayors drafted it. So I think we need to work on this. But even at the $3 level, it would mean $100,000 a year for 5 years, which is not a huge amount of money, but since this city council is very interested in the topic, at least it's nice to know that there's being some progress made at the national level. One of the other points that was made was I'm on the water task force, and one of the points that was made there, I'll give you a more complete report later, but that producing energy is a huge use of water as well. So it was a very good conference, and we've got some legislative things I want to deal with. Anybody have a question about it? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other staff reports? If not, next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. Can I hear a motion for that? They're attached for January 14th.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. There's been motion by Danielle, second by Robert. All those in favor of approving the minutes indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Next on our agenda is an opportunity for public input. I have just one public input card that would like to present before the agenda items, and that is Gary Seco. Would you like to please come now and speak to the item? Please note your address and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Gary Seco from 506 West Vermont. I have a little bit of a handout here. This is just a brief continuation of what we were doing last week. I know people have had their fill of lighting, and I'm getting sick and tired of it too, but I thought that there was a little bit more darkness than light shed last week. And so I just wanted to do a little bit I could to try to maybe provide a better framework for people to understand what's going on here. We are, I should mention that we're sort of focusing on Campus Town because that's been proposed as a model for the rest of the University District, which includes parts of Urbana and the campus in Champaign. And also, we've been also looking at leadership in energy and environmental design as sort of a framework for developing new lighting because they have guidelines for making it efficient and effective and a minimal impact on the environment. And May just come back from the conference with the topic of sustainability, so I think that's fitting. If you want to sort of get a handle on this thing, I think this is one way to look at it. 3 sort of easily grasped basic principles here. One is the intensity. How bright do you want the light? Okay, so that's I. The direction, where you're going to direct the light, and that's the D. And the efficiency with which you're producing the light, and that's E. So you can think of this IDE, the first 3 letters of idea. So if somebody asks you about this, you can say, oh yeah, IDE, intensity, direction, efficiency. We look at intensity as one thing. Now, LEED has the same guidelines for intensity as the industry standards, and they have 4 different lighting zones. What's very interesting, however, is I did some measurements on Campus Town, and these measurements on light intensity are from about 300 to 600%, 3 to 6 times brighter than what is recommended as what's appropriate for 3 or 4. So Campus Town is very bright. It seems to be a bit off the scale, and if anybody's been to downtown Urbana, downtown Champaign, compared to Campus Town, you see there is a difference. So this is one thing that people should realize. It is really bright. The main thing I want to focus on, however, was this notion of direction. What direction should the light go in? Okay, so last week it was discussed and implied that it's inappropriate in places where there are pedestrians to use what's called cutoff lighting, because this is going to make it hard to recognize people. Remember that? It doesn't provide vertical illumination. So I've been looking at some online, well, how about the electricity here? Where do I plug it in? I can take this one out, right? Okay. So I've been looking at MIT physics lectures on iTunes Academy, and it's really effective when they do something physical, okay? So I'm going to try to do this here. This is a light bulb, okay? Now we have 2 major kinds. On campus, this is our lights, right? They are unshielded. They sort of go in every direction, so I'll put it on here, and there you go. We have other types of lights. We have residential lights, and what do they look like in Urbana? My wife got this one right away. They look like this. Isn't that cool? Okay. So now the thing is, you want to be able to see me. It's very bright in here, so you can still see the added light right here. So the argument is that somehow that this here, which doesn't have any light restricted going above, that somehow is better than, here's a cutoff picture, that is somehow better than this. That's what we were told last week. Okay? Now looking at this, the reflector is taking all that light, putting it down. There is more vertical to see me and horizontal illumination with the cutoff picture than without it. This is basic physics, okay? So that's one point. The other point was made that you don't want to have the shielding if you want to be able to see the facade, okay? So what's going on here? Well, the only reason that you would need to get rid of this is when? If it's too low.
If it's below me. Whenever this is above the object, it is better than the non-cutoff. This is fairly clear, right? So this light will illuminate facades. It's restricted 90 degrees up to the height of the light. Now, it doesn't illuminate the facades in the 2nd and 3rd stories. Do you want that? Do people living in the 2nd and 3rd stories want the light going up? It doesn't light up the sky, okay? So this is something that hopefully you'll keep in your head, and it's fairly simple. Nothing really complicated about what's going on here. And this is, you can read this in lots of places, and this is why LEED says that you should restrict the light going up, okay? And this is no problem with pedestrians, no problem with traffic. It is good lighting, okay? The 3rd one is efficiency. And it was stated last week that the LEED requirements for lighting power densities violate ASHRAE and IESNA standards. So basically, we were told that it's built right into the language that there's a violation going on here. The real problem is that this was presented exactly backwards. Okay? What is this measurement here that we're talking about? Lighting power density is a measurement of energy use, not of the light produced. So it's analogous to how many gallons of gas you burn to drive 100 miles, right? LEED says you should only burn 80% of what the normal industry standard is, right? That's what LEED is saying, right? That's good, right? It's less energy. It doesn't mean you produce 80% less light, okay? So that needs to be clarified, and the LEED is completely consistent with the guidelines because they recommend maximum allowable power. How many watts per square foot? We want to have less watts, right? Does that sort of make sense, right? Not more watts, okay? So LEED is completely consistent with that. How do you get less watts per light? Well, there's a number of things that you can do. One is, brings us back to intensity. Less intensity, right? You're using less power. It brings us back to taking the light that you do produce and putting it down, right? You'll get about twice as much light with a fixture like this as you would without it, because the light that would be going up is coming down. Or you could reduce your wattage by half and keep the same intensity, right? So that's another way you can do it. Third way is that you can come up with lighting devices, lamps that are very efficient. And we did some discussion about LEDs, and you may hear more about that too. I went over to Public Works the other day, measured the light under the LED lamp, measured the light under the standard ones. The light intensity under the LED was twice the average in lumens of the other two lamps. And we have been told that LEDs aren't there yet. So I don't know why but this is a problem. There may be other problems with LEDs, but the brightness is not, at least as it's set there. And I would like to invite all of you to visit that after. And that's really all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Seco, for your comments. That's the only public input that I have, unless there's anyone else. Okay, we have one more, but they'll be heard at the time of the item, and that's with regard to Menards. So our next item on the agenda is a presentation by our consultants with regard to the Philo Road Beautification Plan, and Bill, I'll ask you to introduce that.
Yes, I'd like to introduce Garrett Perry from Schreiber Anderson Associates. Garrett and Rob Stein had worked a considerable amount of hours in putting together the presentation you'll see tonight. But just for a little background, in your packet were concept plans and some cross-sections that were the results of some of the charrettes and public input that we received. Tonight, though, as you hear Garrett's presentation, staff will be really seeking two key items. I know that the council goal from a year ago was to have construction activities, beautification activities occur in the Philo Road corridor in this coming construction season. And in order to meet that tight timetable, we need some kind of acceptance of this plan, and with that acceptance, then we would then want to enter into a contract with Schreiber Anderson Associates to go to the next design development phase of work so that we can get to the point of plans and specifications to then go out for bid later this year. And I guess no project discussion would be complete without talking about funding. There's a memo in this packet about funding. We don't necessarily need any final decisions tonight on funding, but when we get into the budgets and more particularly the capital improvement discussions, funding for this project will certainly be, discussion will be needed for this and other needs within the community, so we need to think about that. But there is money currently in the budget to go to the next phase of engineering design. If staff is so directed to do that, that money is in this current budget. So that's not an issue. So without any further discussion, I'd like to turn over to Garrett, and he has some slides and make his presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Garrett Perry. I'm with landscape architecture, engineering, and planning firm out of Madison, Wisconsin called Schreiber Anderson Associates. This is our first project in Urbana, and we're extremely excited to be here. It's a great community. We are pleasantly pleased to see the turnout and the vitality and the interest that a lot of people have taken in on this project. Just to kind of, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I think a lot of you already know the process that's taken place, but I just wanted to show you backup of what your community has done to get to this point at this stage. In general, our project scope, the end result is to create these plans that you see in front of you, to develop concept plans that can be taken further out into construction documents. Coordinating with the acceptability of design guidelines with the other agencies. We've talked with a number of different agencies to make sure that these plans are viable and functional. And then to look at an implementation strategy. This is a large corridor. It's not all going to be done in 1 year. We'd love to have it done all in 1 year, but financially that's a little bit difficult. So we put together a bit of an implementation strategy to how to go through and get the full project completed. And then lastly, as Bill had mentioned, that is combined into the final memo that was developed by Bill, and that is giving a tool to Public Works to develop final probable costs. The process started out with a 4-day work session. We had, the mayor was there, Lynn Barnes, Dennis Roberts, all participated, actually got in and actually started drawing and giving a lot of input, mixing it up with the community, which showed a very strong support of the council to this project. We met first with the steering committee. The steering committee consisted of Lisa Karcher, Tom Carino, Doug Miller, and Bill Gray, obviously. Very wise, thorough group to give us advice and lead us down to the final plans. We did an awareness walk. We weren't that familiar with the area. After a lot of history and what's taking place in the corridor, it shed a lot of light on what we needed to do to continue on with plans. One of the strong components, we did, I think it was approximately 12 stakeholder meetings. I had 2 interviews after the fact, after I went back to Madison and talked with a couple other people. But surprisingly, what was being said by the stakeholders and what was being said by the community members was almost spot on. It was, when you wrote it down on a piece of paper, it was almost identical. So it's said that there is some concern, but everybody's on the same page, which is usually pretty difficult to resolve when we're going through this process. We did 2 days of interviews with stakeholders. We then held a design charrette, which was a 4-day set or a 4-hour session. We sat down at tables. We did a question and answer session where we pushed out 5 questions and just made people free think and saying, what can this corridor be? What do you want this corridor to look like? From that, we went to an actual hands-on. We had maps on the table. People were drawing what they wanted to see and where they wanted to see them. We had toolboxes and everybody was sticking, and it was a very lively and active group. I think we probably had about 30 to 40 people that showed up to the charrette process. From that, we had to consolidate all this information and sit down. Rob and I were basically locked in the DPW room for about, I think it was about 14 hours, and we just cranked up a bunch of concept designs, which I'll show you here shortly. After we came up with the concepts, we went back to the community and had another session and presented our ideas to the community, and then they finally voted on what their preferred concept were. We then had a phone conversation with the steering committee, giving them our findings, what we heard from the community, and there was consensus from the steering committee, ourselves, and what we heard from the community to develop the final plans. And that's where we are tonight. We're presenting to you the final concept plans. Just in brief, we gave, in the design charrette, we gave some general streetscape. Well, I already spoke about this, about what the design charrette process was. In a nutshell, I mentioned about some of those things that the stakeholders had mentioned and also the community members at the charrette had mentioned. This is just a brief list of some things that popped up. If you want to see the full memo, there is a memo that we provided to Bill and staff members that spelled everything out and showed exactly what everybody was saying. But in a nutshell, green up the streets. Get more vegetation on the street, make it more pedestrian friendly. Improve the architecture. There's some buildings down there that are a little bit a little bit older in architecture. They'd like to see some improvements to that to give a little bit more sparkle to the corridor. Planting buffers and parking lots. There's these large areas of parking lots that they think does not bode well for pedestrian feeling, safety, and aesthetics. So whatever you can do to work with the business owner to add vegetation to the parking lots to buffer them, and then also at the street's edge to buffer those parking lots. Make it safe, brighten it up, make the walking areas smoother and more contiguous. A great idea that actually resounded from a number of the tables was adding sculptures. There's a great amenity to the south, and they want to pull those sculptures up and through this corridor to create an identity for the corridor. Might create some attraction, bring some people out, help to people to kind of attract to come through and walk through the area. So sculptures were thought of how to, adding it into the right of way and adding into the landscaping. And then it's kind of surprising because you've already spoke of a lot of these things. You talked about greening things up, about water, about being more sustainable, and that's a lot of the things that was resounding from the community. So they wanted to incorporate some stormwater practices that don't necessarily put all the stormwater into a pipe. How do we make rain gardens or bioswales, or what can we do with vegetation to really start to soak up that water rather than put it in a pipe? And then obviously better lighting was another big issue that a lot of people spoke of. During the design shred outcome, we developed 4 main components: the inventory and analysis, design shred summary, which basically took all 5 tables and consolidated them into one map. We developed 4 concept plans and then 4 concept sections. Inventory analysis just looked at the entire area. You have great neighborhood base. There's no reason why Philo can't improve and really start to encourage new development and better development into the Philo Road corridor and make it safer for people to come down and participate and live and thrive. So there's a lot of support and a lot of support for the corridor to be strong. The summary had a whole slew of different ideas, but we consolidated them into this kind of long summary. The main idea was that there is a green band or a green way that goes all the way up from Windsor all the way up to Florida, improving the intersections at Florida, creating better lighting, like we had said before, trying to highlight the area with adding sculptures. A lot of this talks about the parking lots, greening up the parking lots, adding street trees, just vegetating it to make it a more safe and more aesthetically pleasing area. From that, we developed 4 concepts. Concept A comes up with a very vegetated, but this comes to a different spin with the sidewalk. We actually took a little bit of liberty by taking a very kind of curvy pattern to the sidewalk and then having complementary plantings along that walkway. Concept B keeps and just for reference, concept A and B are between Colorado and Florida. Concept C and D are from Colorado to Windsor. So this concept B keeps the sidewalk as is and then creates this welcoming appearance with these shrub beds or landscape beds, whatever they are, to vegetate it up, adding more street trees, vegetating the parking lots. A lot of the concepts show maintaining the existing lights as they are on what would be the east side. As you go farther down, they actually switch over because of the power lines, but then complement with pedestrian lights on the opposite side. And as was mentioned earlier, working with a cutoff light, not your globes or your your very high intensity, but trying to maximize the efficiency of lighting without having to have this big light glare throughout the corridor. So that was also addressed as well. Concept C this is again from Colorado down to Windsor. This looks at, again, more of a flowing attitude. This was used so that a lot of the areas from Colorado down to Windsor have the ability of catching some of that stormwater that's running along the side of up above the sidewalk. Again, looking at vegetating the parking lots, adding additional street trees, and again, the lighting Actually, in this area, we were showing the lighting on the west side being an add-on, an arm or whatever, added onto the existing high pole, and then a pedestrian light on the opposite side. And then concept D looked at a more minimalistic attitude towards landscaping, but creating a more sculptural element to it by having the bands of landscape kind of highlight the sculptures. And then these are the complementary sections that you see for A, B, C, and D. So the final concept design, what we did is we, again, like I said, we took all that information, pulled it together, and we came up with these final concept plans. And then we also developed some probable costs that we forwarded on to the steering committee. Concept A that you see in your packet is from. This is not the full. This is not the full landscape build out from. This is just a section of that. But it incorporates a lot of the things that that a lot of the community members were talking about, and it also comes up with some more realistic things that Public Works was requesting. We kind of melded these larger bands of native landscaping, so it would be a mix of forbs and grasses. These areas can be used for water infiltration. They'd be speckled with larger boulders to create a little bit more interest and accent. And they're also holding places for the sculptures that would go throughout the corridor. As we get into further design, we're gonna determine exactly how much planting goes in, how many sculptures go in, so on and so forth. The other idea is because of the cost factor, lighting for Florida to Colorado, because the light's already existing, we would retrofit the existing pole with an arm and light fixture and then have a pedestrian light on the opposite side. But because from Colorado to Windsor, a lot of those lights are brand new and you really can't retrofit those lights too easily, those lights would be maintained, but a pedestrian light would be added on the opposite side. A lot of other elements that were added here, we're suggesting to do some ground signs. There's some new development that's going in, so rather than the big signs up on the buildings, incorporate them in the landscape so they have a more pedestrian feel to them. Definitely add street trees. A lot of people wanted to see some small pocket parks so that if they go out and they have an ice cream or they have a coffee or they have something in the area, they have this small place. So you see up in the middle of the page on the top, you see the small pocket park. Creates just a small little area off the sidewalk to be able to pause and view sculpture, view the landscape, so on and so forth. One of the big aspects of this is our right-of-way restriction. We have approximately 100 foot of right-of-way for the majority of this corridor. We're showing a lot of these landscape bubbles outside of that corridor, and that's a lot of that reasoning is because they want this flowing, this larger attitude of landscape so that the store owners the property owners start to bring that landscape into their property. So there is going to be some coordination. You'll see a note up on the top of your sheets that state, planting outside of the right-of-way would have to be coordinated with business owners so that gets that full idea gets implemented. If there's some restrictions to that, we would have to amend that, how much landscaping actually happens and how rolling that landscape is. But this creates a great opportunity for infiltration, a lot of buffering, and maintenance-wise, when you're working with native species, grasses, forbs, once you hit that 5-year mark of maintenance, you start to reduce maintenance altogether. You're not mowing as much, so your crews are not out mowing lawn, they're leaving that grass as it is. So this is a maintenance reduction plan as well, trying to reduce maintenance. Concept B, the preferred concept, is, again, from Colorado to Windsor. Again, we would maintain the existing path. None of the sidewalks would change. They'd all stay as is. But again, this shows how you can really affect the landscape by adding those swaths of landscape, incorporating the sculptures in wherever possible, adding the ground signs, vegetating the parking lots wherever possible, trying to encourage business owners to do that. And then again, a small pocket park to create that area for people to stop, pause, and take some time in Philo. And then just to support that, here are our sections. Again, the taller poles and the light poles will also have banners. So we talked about some ideas. There were some theming ideas that came out of this. There was a number of ideas. I know the mayor had some thoughts on it as well. So that'll have to be another task force to kind of come up with what that icon is on these banners. But the idea is creating that cadence down the corridor to create a unique and segregated area, not segregated, but a unique and identifying area to this whole corridor. And the banners will really help with that, along with the new lights, along with the landscape, and then as the sculptures start to punch in there, that's really going to create a lot of attraction and a lot of amenities for pedestrians to come down to Philo Road. Some of the amenities that we looked at, again, these are some of these lights that we're showing here are not cutoffs. The one to the far left is. The thought of not necessarily somewhat of a prairie style was desired. We can play with those lights as we get into this. We can still have the stylings and still have a cutoff light and an efficient light. But these are some of the general amenities that were selected by the community. Again, some thought of sculpture. Anna and I had discussed a number of times with the sculpture task force. Hopefully that's a component that can be added into Philo Road. But as we get farther into design, we'll get more specific and actually we'll be picking specific amenities for the corridor. Right now, this is kind of the genre, kind of the feel of what this area might hold as far as amenities. A lot of bicycle racks were also desired. They thought that, you know, by adding those and keeping them either by the storefronts or down at the roadside, that's really going to help to bring people into the corridor. Landscape, again, as I talked about before, floral but native. You know, adding some floral aspects, but having a lot of grass components with it. We've done a number of these in other communities where they're really successful, and the maintenance is really not too heavy. And actually, even during the winter, that grass creates a very nice component to the winter landscape, that dreary winter landscape. Probable costs, and this is the last slide. So from those concepts, we went through and used our standard capitalization stuff that we've had from previous projects, generalized costs, and we created some spreadsheets that we provided to Bill and to Doug. And then Doug and Bill put that together into the final spreadsheet that you see in front of you tonight, along with the memo that was developed. So we had a hand in providing the costs that we thought were probable for this landscape, and then Bill and Doug finalized the costs. So with that is my presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Garrett. Very exciting. Brandon.
Yeah, thanks. This is very exciting. I like a lot of what I see in the plan. I want to give a few items of feedback and then ask a few questions about how we're going to make this happen. First, about the bike racks, I like that we're trying the location out by the street. I think it's, though, in no way substitutes for racks at the door. We really need to work with these business owners to get racks at the door. Me as a cyclist, I'm not going to park way out there by the street and then walk the whole way to the door of the store. So this might be more of a park and ride. I might ride from my home to here and park and then get on the bus, but we need both. The second comment was about the rain gardens. I think that's a really neat idea to incorporate some of that stormwater in. I know this year the State of Illinois' rain garden grant cycle just opened up again, so if we want to get it in an application, I think now's the time, and we definitely need their help funding that sort of thing, so that'd be great. Third, I wanted to ask a little bit about the private activity and involvement. It looks like it is really key that we get private property owners along the corridor to participate in this as well. I wonder what you've, Bill, and what you and the other staff have talked about in terms of getting that involvement. Do we need to identify who our cheerleader is, whether it's you or Tom or Lynn or somebody to be the cheerleader to talk to the private business owners along this corridor? Lynn's a good cheerleader. She can't be beat.
I can do that.
And really sell this plan to them and sell the idea of their participation in it too. You know, some of that asphalt that people say they want to break up and add more green space to is on their private property, and we can't just go jackhammer it and turn it into something. We need their help. I wonder if you've thought about things like incentives. If they'll give us easement, you know, we'll split the cost 50-50 on some sort of improvement that might be on their property. Or if they'll install a bike rack at their door, we'll split the cost 50-50. Ways to give them incentives and to get out there and sell this to them. So what are your thoughts so far on that, and on sort of who can cheerlead that to this crowd?
Brandon, just briefly,
Yeah,
I want to
yeah,
make a
go
comment
ahead.
on my stakeholder, the interviews. There was a lot of positive feedback from the existing tenants and owners.
Great.
It was almost unanimous that vegetation, greenery, landscape needed to be incorporated into the corridor. So that is, you're already there. I mean, there's already some buy-in, and I think you're right on by saying how do we bring them together and keep this process all the way through. I can't talk on that. I think that's more of a bill, but just to
Yeah.
confirm, there is a consensus within the community and with the business owner that greenery is going to really help.
Great.
Well, we talked about this somewhat last fall, and I think it's a combination of community development, public works staff, council members, working together, and I don't think this is all going to happen before August 15th, but I think over a period of time it will happen, and certainly we want to incorporate as much as we can, as soon as we can, but I think the first emphasis would be what can we do in the right-of-way? Do we want to move ahead with certain components of this plan? And I think, personally, if we get a couple property owners that do buy into it, that the others through peer pressure or otherwise, or the fact that, boy, it does really look good, I want to get on board too, it's going to happen. But we do need those first three businesses to say, yep, here I am. And yes, I think there will be incentives. I mean, certainly that has to be part of it, and at least to 50% or higher, cost sharing, and whether it be for landscaping, trees, bike racks, et cetera. We want to do something to transform the area and stay that way. But again, we have a certain budget, and we'll be able to do so much each year, perhaps, and go from there. So I agree with Garrett, though. There are a few businesses I think will, here I am, what do you have? Let's do it now. And then hopefully the others will follow suit.
That's
Go ahead,
great.
Brandon.
The next thing I wanted to ask a bit about was the idea of monument signs. Right now, I wonder about our sign ordinance, whether we, in order to get that to be a standard on this corridor, need to do any changes to our sign ordinance so that, there's new stores coming up out of the ground along this corridor, and if they put up a big pole sign, even one or two, really can change the look when you want this consistency that you talked about along the corridor. Do we need to update our sign ordinance soon to make that work?
Libby's
this
coming.
might
I'll
be
let
a
Libby
good
speak
question
to
for
that.
Libby. Yeah.
About a year ago, we did amend our sign ordinance to try to incentivize monument signs. So we gave an area bonus for monument signs, and that does seem to be working. I know with the new Walgreens on Philo Road, they are going with a monument sign. We've had good success with Myers and Walmart prior to that. Now it's in the code book with the incentive of the additional square footage. In addition, we always use our advisory service to push that concept. So I think we've made some good progress just with the change last year. I know we still have another list of changes to our sign ordinance to keep going and modernizing. Now that we've put the OASS changes behind us and we have a stronger sign ordinance, it might be time to look again and see what we can do. But I've noticed a nice change since we did that.
That's good. Yeah, I think it would be worth the discussion with the next round of sign ordinance changes, whether it's time to grandfather out pole signs in particular corridors like this altogether. My last question, and this may be one for Bill again, sorry to keep you switching, is just about the funding and timing. I know you mentioned that there's $100,000 still unfunded, but that we want to have the first round of this coming out of the ground by the end of this summer, and summer's coming fast. So I couldn't quite tell from that whether all of this summer's activities are already funded such that you could do this first year without us identifying that last $100,000 of funding, or whether we really need to solve that in the next few weeks soon so that you can proceed with this summer schedule.
Well, to talk about this first phase, if you will, or this Florida to Colorado corridor, we had estimated about $460,000 worth of improvements here. but if, there still needs to be identified some sidewalk work, which was not included, and then we were going to mill and resurface the street and restripe it to a 3-lane cross-section, bike lanes, et cetera. That was all about a $700,000 total. We identified, if council concurs, with postponing a couple of projects of about $600,000 of that work. So the question is A, does council concur with those postponements of projects? B, to get that extra $100,000, and it will have to be part of the discussion. Staff will have to make that part of our budget preparation. You know, these are trade-offs. Or C is that we maybe fall short and do what we can for the money we have this year, and that could be a subsequent, follow-up or project or whatever. I mean, just for example, maybe we don't, I don't know, we don't buy banners for this year, for example, and we wait till 08 or 09 or whatever, as an example. So maybe some things that we pick and choose out of the list that we say we make a conscious decision and hold off on this or this or whatever that equals that amount of money. Okay, so that's other options. So those are just some of the things we're thinking about, but we're open to discussion.
Yeah, I support both of those postponements personally and haven't heard big objections to them, and feel like whatever we need to do to make sure it's clear what the priorities are, that this project is important to us. So thank you very much.
And I'd like to make a comment. We could also put in some add alternates. Because we have a 30% contingency, and it might be possible to have maybe banners be an add alternate, so we get it priced out, and then we add it in if some of our other bids come in lower.
Yeah. Totally.
So.
I mean, that's a very good idea, and that's one other component, is that there's a large contingency at this juncture because this is just a concept plan. We don't really have a lot of specific identifications here on specs and whatever and specific numbers. So it could be that the 600,000 may be just fine when we get done, but history tells me that generally isn't the case. But it could be.
Well, when you drive along Philo Road and you see what's going on at North and South Ends, this is great timing. So I think our timing is excellent. Dennis?
Well, I'm pretty encouraged by the plan. I do like the idea of the pocket parks going somewhat into the commercial parking lot area, as long as the property owners are working with the city to establish that. One question might be the maintenance agreement of taking care of the part that's not on city land, but I'm sure we can work that out if they're willing to have the park there in the first place. Can you give us a little bit of an overview about the process that we would go through to have an evaluation of the street going from 4 to 3 lanes and the inclusion of bike lanes and looks like bus pull-out areas and safety areas? Is that a process that we can easily go into? Is that going to require some engineering time on our part? And do you expect that to be something that might happen in 2008 or 2009?
Maybe last question first. We plan to do that in 2008, so it'll be this summer. It'll be part of our resurfacing work that we do. I know the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission has seen this idea on Philo Road as part of the master plan, the bicycle master plan. Yes, the engineering is essentially done. Jennifer Selby has done the geometry, if you will, of fitting this into place. There'll be some median-related work near Florida Avenue. We have that kind of the rumble strip median that will have to be changed in that area, what have you. But it's largely a mill and resurface and striping, and it would fit quite well, actually, in this corridor. So we're not moving curbs, we're not moving them out or moving them in, so that's a big cost item. The curb lines stay as is. But to get a new wearing surface out there, asphalt pavement and striping would be needed. So yes, it'd be this construction season.
Are there additional signals that are being considered for the length of the avenue in some places?
No. We recently upgraded the pedestrian push buttons and countdown and audible signal detection at Philo in Florida, and we also modified all the ramps there for directional ramp access. Before it wasn't directional, it was just kind of a curb cut where a visually impaired person could be not directed directly in the direction they wanted to go. So that's been corrected. So we don't plan to do anything different with signals there. Colorado and Philo do not warrant traffic signals at this time. So to answer your question, outside of the signals down by Philo and Windsor and Scoville, there are no specific traffic signal work at this in this area.
At the northern part.
At the northern part.
I guess I was picturing that there might be some across from the Menards construction.
Meyer, there is.
Meyer, there is.
And those are
Scoville.
not
Scoville.
completed yet, but at Scoville they are in the process of being done.
Okay.
Danielle and then Robert.
I have a couple of questions and then some comments, and it would just start by saying it's a lot of money. And I think Philo Road needs to be more pedestrian friendly, it needs an upgrade, and it needs to be green. So I'm weighing those two things. Couple of questions first and then some comments in terms of feedback. What is what is a streetscape multiplier? That's the big ticket item. Everything else is small ticket items. So I went to the big ticket items. Could you explain what that is? And
Sure.
could you also explain why on the section from Florida to Colorado, it's 92,000 per unit, and the section from Colorado to Windsor, it's 65,000 per unit?
Well, what we did is we took, a certain strip. That streetscape multiplier just reflects the cost for the entire corridor from Florida to Colorado. These costs here really are reflective of a 450-foot length. And if you want to know why it's 450, Garrett would have to answer that question, I guess. But there's different ways of doing this estimate, and all we're doing is at the bottom line is it reflects the entire length between Colorado and Florida. And so that multiplier, all that means is it's a 1,250-foot long length between those two intersecting streets, and that's the difference. 450 times 2.7 is 1,250.
What we did is, in that image that you see in front of you, let's take this image. We took all of the amenities that were in the right-of-way, including plankton, including all the improvements, less any of the street improvements, not the restriping or the. So we took all the trees, all of the sculptures, the bike racks, everything, and there is a distance here. There's a length, and we took all those costs and we said that okay, at this length, there's this much cost. Well, that only covers that much of between Colorado to Florida. So then what I did is I measured from Florida to Colorado and said, okay, it's this length, so that's your multiplier. It's that percentage or that amount of that area.
Oh, I see. And so actually it's a multiplier of all the costs listed above times the amount of units over. Okay.
Right. It's a length time, yeah. And so, and then just to your question about most, and Bill, you can probably as well, why the multiplier, or why the cost per between Windsor and Florida, or between Colorado and Florida and Colorado and Windsor are different. It's because we're not doing as much lighting. We're not doing the big overhead lights from Florida or from Colorado down to Windsor.
So actually, for example, here it says the quantity of, pedestrian lighting, quantity 3. Then there's a multiplier of 2.7. So actually, we're looking at 3 times 2.7 as a total number of lights in that area. Because that actually answers my next question, which is, are we just adding 3 lights here?
Right,
okay.
exactly.
Thank you. It helps me to be able to read this. The next question I have is, why do the bike lanes stop? They're in the Florida to Colorado section, but then you go south and they stop but we have bike connectivity on Windsor Road, so why would we stop the bike lanes and not extend them further south?
Well, we have a side path on the east side,
Right.
all the way down to Windsor Road. So what we're trying to do is, right now, the connectivity stops at the east-west path at Colorado Avenue. So we have an opportunity to, granted, it's going from a transition from a side path to a bike lane, but because of the width of the street, by making a 3-lane cross-section, which will accommodate the traffic in the area fine. We have extra width. We're able to do bike lanes, rather than a more difficult task would be to continue that side path north of Colorado on the east side would be basically very difficult to install. So it's a transition from a side path to a bike lane at Colorado.
Okay, so you're on the street, so I'm riding my bike off of Florida Avenue, I come onto Philo Road, I'm on the street, I get to Colorado, if I'm headed, to the Atkins development to the south or Myers or something, I basically at Colorado would get on the sidewalk, and it's a multi-purpose path at that point that's 8 feet or... Okay.
10 feet. It's very wide.
Oh, it's 10 feet.
I think it's about 10 feet.
Okay, I see that. So actually, that's the east side, not the west side. I understand. Then the third question I have is, are the costs of the pocket parks included in this estimate?
They're not.
Okay, because they're on private property.
Correct.
And then there's that issue. Okay.
Correct.
And is the thought, maybe this is more a question for Bill, but is it the thought that the pocket parks would be developed with the needs of the business owners in mind, that they would be working to decide what kind of green space they may want to create? Say it's a restaurant space, the restaurant might want to have some kind of outdoor seating that integrates with the sidewalk. And were we assuming there'd be a cost share then, or, okay.
That's what we had talked about in the past.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, because I guess when I first looked at this, it looked like the pocket park was located where the old gas station was located. And I thought, the worst of urban design is actually, maybe I shouldn't criticize our nearest neighbor, but the worst of urban design is where we have just this no man's land, and someone had an idea for a park, and they threw it down between 2 parking lots, and it's just terrible. And actually, the concept of a pocket park could be dangerous in those situations. Like, we've had some problems with city parks. It looks like a waste of energy, et cetera. So I think that if we're working with specific businesses with their needs in mind to create these pocket parks, then I think that responds to my concern. But I don't want to just kind of scatter pocket parks everywhere.
Right.
I think that's not a good way of moving forward with this.
And this, again, this is a master plan, so this is kind of is this the exact place where the pocket park should go?
Right.
It's throwing it out there saying this is what the community said. They wanted some spaces to go out, be able to, enjoy an ice cream cone, enjoy a coffee, enjoy a Sunday afternoon after church, whatever it is. But it's we're trying to include all these ideas. Is it the exact location where this is? No. Is it an idea of what the pocket park might look like? Yes. So,
Okay.
so that's a future planning initiative that's going to have to happen to figure out where exactly
Okay.
those pocket parks to be.
Okay, so the specific question of where the MTD stop is, where the pocket park is, all of those things are actually future.
MTD, I think, is pretty well locked down.
Oh, it is?
I think it is.
Okay.
We showed it directly across from one another because there's that new development to the north. Bill, if you'll help me, there's a new development on Florida to Colorado. That's the
Point.
The Point.
Yeah,
Is
the
that the
commercial.
residential area where Kmart used to be?
Right.
Yes.
So
Right.
that bus stop actually got shifted from initial plans. The idea here is that there will be 2 bus stops. Where they exactly go, these are relatively close. But
Okay.
Again, we've got a lot of work in survey and whatnot to identify exact locations of items.
And I'm unclear, again, this is the issue where bikers really should decide where the bike racks go, and I'm glad that you're working with the Pedestrian Advisory Commission because they'll know. But we should ask the MTD, if not already, whether or not people actually bike to an MTD stop and then lock their bike and then go, because we have bike amenities on the buses. It may or may not be necessary, so we really need to be integrating with what they see their users needing in those locations.
Right. And just the plans, and again, it's difficult. We can't show the whole quarter. That's what's so tough about it. We can't show the businesses, but there was a debate. Do you have the bicycle parking at the road? Do you have it at the, up at the businesses. And so there's a combination of both. In a nutshell, we're saying there needs to be bicycle parking. Where it is, we don't know. Again, a lot of this is identifying elements that have to go in the corridor. It's appropriate to have it by the bus stop. I think that's fair. And yeah, by the businesses as well, but we just couldn't show that by the businesses, but that a lot of the community desires to be able to go right next to the grocery store or next to Walgreens or wherever and park their bike and be able to go inside.
Okay.
They don't want to park, a lot of them don't want to park at the street to go to the store, so that'll have to be worked out again in future design phases. But the main intent here is that bike parking is desired and necessary in the corridor.
Okay. What's, just two final questions, and I have about 3 comments. The floral aspect of it, are we talking perennial, or are we talking annuals where we're going to have the intensive maintenance like we have in downtown?
I would suggest perennials. I mean, I don't know what your opinion. I think annuals are, it's kind of throwaway money. Unless you have an exact theme that you want to achieve, if it's something that's really, resounding in Philo, but in my opinion, I think you get maintenance-wise, and annuals, you don't really get that natural look as much, so I would encourage to go with a mixed, so you're looking at like a floral meadow is what you're is kind of the idea that we're trying to achieve. So there it'd be into the seed mix or into the planting mix.
Okay. And just a couple of feedback comments. I think it's my understanding you're getting feedback now, but in terms of us actually making a decision about when to allocate funds, we would see a whole picture. Is that right, Bill?
No.
Or
Well,
are we
tonight,
being asked tonight to
I think
commit to these?
our staff is seeking is an approval of the concept, which would allow them to go ahead and proceed with Phase 1 and the concept of utilizing the funds as described. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we're not going to see a picture before we allocate the funds, a full picture of exactly where everything's going to be. Is that correct?
I think we could ask for updates, but we want them to continue to work on it so that we can keep on our timeline. I think that would be.
There's a timing, I mean, to show that full picture, if you will, we need to go to the next phase, and we need
approval to go to the next
phase. Yeah.
What, wouldn't we just approve the money needed for the next phase rather than the whole thing?
Well, there is money budgeted now to do design, so.
That's already approved.
That's already approved, that's in the budget.
Okay.
So to do construction, I need approval from council for those big dollars.
But don't we want to see a picture of where everything's going to be before we start construction? What's the argument against that?
Correct. Nothing, that's what we would do.
Okay, so we would see a picture of where everything's going to be.
Correct. You would see
before
plans.
construction happens. And before we kind of specify
Yes.
full funds.
I'm hoping that you do that. I encourage you highly to do that.
Right.
It's prudent, and I think that you guys will benefit a lot by knowing where the money's going and how it's being allocated.
But I think it's important for us to generally agree that we want to spend the money so that we don't spend this an additional money uselessly.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I just think there's a difference between saying, yes, we'd like a sculpture, and it happens to end up being in front, in a really inappropriate place, versus us really understanding how people are going to flow through an area and being able to see the big picture. So I found it really difficult in some ways to look at a dollar figure and then see kind of a concept that really was just showing a segment, when I know every business on that, on that strip. And the question I had was, how are people going to move through these, and where are the pocket parks going to be? Where is the sculptures going to be? What is it going to look like? So I'd like to see the full plans before approving. I'd like to see the Planning Commission and Bike Commission's comments. It was mentioned in the memo that they had comments, but we didn't actually see them. And so there are advisory boards, and I'd like to see their comments before making a final vote. I think that I said the thing about the pocket parks. I definitely think there needs to be a cost share and integration with the businesses, and I think a lot of good could come out of that. With the sculptures, I was thrilled to see that the community was interested in extending some of the sculptural work that's happening in the Atkins development down the corridor and establishing an identity. The Public Arts Task Force has been meeting and will shortly turn into a commission that will have a selection process, and that selection process will have a component where the community that is involved, the businesses and the people who live in the area, will be very much involved in the process of providing input on different proposals. So I think in the past what we've done is have our streetscape commission, our streetscape committee within the city make decisions like that, and I think as a city we're ready to have curated works, so we're ready to have selection committees of artists working with businesses and community members to make selections on things. I also think when you say sculpture, I think that actually we should be thinking broader than that, like fountains, historical sites, site-specific pieces, and integration with the bus stop, and art integrating with the bus stop. Since if you think, where do people spend their time on Philo Road? They're going to spend their time at the bus stop, and that would be a great place for there to be art. Whereas in some of the pictures, and I know this is just concept, there'd be the bus stop, and then a little bit down the way there'd be some sculpture. I think we want to avoid what is known as plop art, which is we take the sculpture, we airlift it down, and we plop it into the area. I know that people will have a lot of opinions as to what it is that they want to see, and we want those opinions, and we want the community to really help to drive what happens so that it's specific to the space, rather than we're going to take some sculptures and plop them down and make some things happen. So I think there needs to be a concept there, and there needs to be some process, and we are working and should have that process in place soon. And I think that's it, but I assume that we're sending this to council next week, and if we could get the minutes from the Plan Commission and Bike Commission, that would be helpful before making that final decision.
Libby, do you have a comment?
I checked with Robert Myers, and this was not an item for Plan Commission. We usually take plan cases and larger planning projects. However, plan commissioners were invited to the workshops, and I believe some did participate. So many opportunities for Plan Commission to be involved, but this was not an agenda item and would be an unusual one to bring to them. I'm not sure that they would be able to add at this point, but I know that they did have the opportunity to participate.
Robert, you're next, and then Dennis.
I just wanted to say that based on our first initial thoughts on Philo Road and what we see tonight, I think that the people were involved the way we had asked. And I'm glad to see that the MTD is involved. I was going to ask that question, but it has been answered. And as we move forward, the issue of providing for the specific locations of various things, I know that this is just a concept. And how will that process really work? When, for example, when you get the final specifications and criteria for what you need, defining the specific areas of concern, like the pocket parks, how will we interlace with the community and the stakeholders to make those decisions on that process? Is there a process in place that we have in mind at this point?
No, I have not personally given that thought. We'd have to obviously discuss with the consultants and, with community development folks to put that together, but.
Well, I would traditionally there is a steering committee that is involved, and there's a lot of different issues that are involved here. You've got bike issues, you've got sculpture, you've got landscape, you've got a number of different issues. So I almost see whether there's liaisons from all these different subcommittees that can get together to be kind of the steering committee to see this design through. We by no means want to locate the sculptures. We by no means want to locate the bike facilities. We are asking direction from you all. So that's going to be your task force that's going to have to be developed. You're going to have to develop those committees, those steering committees, however you want to designate that, that's going to give us direction. We will give input, We will give direction on what's constructible, what's not constructible. We'll give best management practices. We'll give all the advice that we have as to our previous experience. But when it's really all done and said, you are going to direct. We're your hands. We're drawing for you. So you got to help us to put the things in places because we don't have that knowledge in this corridor. So,
Dennis and then Charlie.
Just a few thoughts. I guess when I was asking about the engineering and the delineation of the bike path and the crosswalks and the 3 lanes, it was with the memory reference of the particular input that we had from the community on Lincoln Avenue and all the discussion about exactly where a bike lane should enter and intersect a sidewalk. I guess I hadn't heard that kind of a depth of discussion. I assume then, though, that it has been at least approached in other commissions because you already indicated that you had a rather defined final plan for the restriping of the street. So, I'll go with that. I don't have to see the hard work of that all over again, but I just remember how particular the needs of the biking community were expressed and then met by the thoughtful planning of the pedestrian crosswalks and everything, and I just hadn't seen that in this process yet, so I was sort of wondering where that came through. Secondly, my understanding is, I may be wrong because I haven't been following the park district's planning with Meadowbrook Park. My understanding is that the city doesn't really own all those sculptures in Meadowbrook Park, that it owns a few of them, and a lot of them are on loan and have been positioned there and have been removed and replaced by others. And I think that if the city has had that kind of trial and error or test case scenario for it being a sculpture gallery, an outdoor sculpture gallery, there may be opportunities to use sculpture placement along Fowler Road under the same criteria and basically say that we have identified 5 sculpture locations along the corridor, invite statewide or local artists to submit pieces to the newly formed Arts Commission for placement, and without having to necessarily purchase sculpture, we can possibly show sculpture for a period of 2 to 5 years to the great benefit of the artists, and without necessarily having to purchase every single sculpture along the block. I'm just saying that we could look into that. Finally, the only thing that to me strikes an odd note to my meager understanding of landscaping in Illinois is how many boulders appear along this corridor. My observation, having lived in Illinois for only 11 years, is that you almost never see a rock in anybody's yard, and when you're digging a hole or you look around the creek beds, you don't see boulders and giant river stones laying here and there. So I'm not sure how they would seem to me almost like to nullify the natural planting directive of the corridor to suddenly make it a boulder-strewn path. So I think that the idea of having them having accents within the sculptural areas makes sense, but I would suggest that for all the boulders that are indicated as being possibly purchased and ornamental, it's very unnatural for our area, and what might be preferable would be a hardwood shrub of low height, or something that would become then year-round focal point that would act in the same massing area as a boulder. And that's a really tiny thing, but there's so many on the plan that I had to say something about it. I'm sorry.
Charlie?
Well, Dennis, have you seen the rain garden between Allen Hall and McKinley?
Is that a natural feature to Illinois?
We need all the help we can get sometimes, Dennis.
Yeah, we need little mountains.
Yeah, and
Better than a pile of rocks.
At $50 a rock, I know people pay good money to bring rocks to their yard. Anyway, it's probably it's a way to break up the landscape. So a couple of quick questions here. I appreciate your comments about lighting and sustainability issues. Do you have any experience with LEED with respect to outdoor lighting?
With outdoor lighting, LEED outdoor lighting?
Yeah.
Me, myself, no. We do have staff members that are LEED qualified for site lighting and for site site design.
And we would get their guidance to help deal with this?
We can. A lot of times, though, with LEED, unless it's in the ordinance, that's a hard push.
Okay.
Because
It's something we're discussing. You've missed all that discussion.
I heard, and I guess my only comment on that is that if your ordinance states it has to be IES compliant, you're not gonna get LEED. I don't think. That's my opinion. I would love it. I think it'd be a great idea. So if we can hit the photometrics and make sure that the road is lit correctly, and we can be efficient, and reduce the amount of water that's being output. We are restricted, however, with the existing lighting placement.
Okay.
Our poles are
Yeah,
where they are.
I guess one of the things I'd like to do is get over to Normal, Illinois, and see what they're doing, because they are doing LEED outdoor lighting.
Sure, and that's with a brand-new build-out.
Yeah.
So we're restricted with existing poles and what we can do. We can infill on the other side with pedestrian lights. The other thing you have to consider, too, is that cost.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of the pedestrian lighting.
Sure.
Was where I'm.
We can accommodate that with no problem. And
Okay.
yes, we do have people in our office, and I'm familiar with a lot of the LEED practices. Again, I'm not certified LEED, but
And then
that isn't an issue.
in terms of redirecting runoff to plantings and stuff like that, rain gardens, I've got a rain garden that I pass 4 times a day, actually, and so I know that they work. And I know that our Mike Brunk, our city arborist, is very interested in doing more of that. So I think that's pretty timely. In terms of redirecting runoff, would we actually be able to capture some of the stuff that's on the street before it ends up in the storm sewer? How much work is involved in redirecting some of that?
Yeah, we'll have to investigate that. It does entail some curb cuts. It does entail allowing the water to flow off the street through the
Okay,
terrace.
so there is some construction work involved.
Yeah,
Okay.
there is. And I mean, it's not, you're not reconstructing the street, and with your advice and with your direction, we could look at those. We have done that in other communities.
Yeah, because I think that's,
So that's something we can do.
why send off water that we can use? And then finally, I'd like to touch a little bit more on the private costs that have been raised here, cost sharing and that sort of thing. You show a lot of green outside of the right-of-way. The costs that you've given here, I assume, don't include any of the work outside of the right-of-way. That's correct? Do we have any estimates of the costs of doing some of this additional work? What is it going to cost the private sector to pony up, in various scenarios, be it 100% or cost share 50% and so on? Do we have some numbers associated with, I own this parking lot and it's, X number of feet long and I want to green it up. Is there a per foot cost that we can work with, for example?
No, and I can very quickly, in doing it, be the same multiplier fashion, but I can, or fashion, excuse me, I can develop a cost of what the pocket park estimate can be, and then the planting outside of right of way, and provide that as information, and Bill can forward that on to you, and that, if that helps you make decisions on that, or to go out and speak
I
with
think
business
it's
members.
yeah.
Oh, I guess I would see that as, once we kind of start showing our face and putting some money into this place, I see us then approaching owners and say, here's our plan, and kind of converse with them to see what they'd be even willing, and you kind of shape a project based on what kind of money they're willing to put into it.
I think they need to know some of the ideas of costs. That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
and I think
is,
our staff would we wouldn't want to go to a meeting unless we had some of those things we could whip out of our pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to, on that note, once this steering committee is developed, and once there's discussion with business owners of what their buy-in is and how much they actually want to do, that may not be reflective of what we're showing on this plan.
Right.
Okay. So we're going to need to know who's going to be doing what and where and how much landscaping they're interested in. before final plans are complete, because we can't be drawing this stuff out in the right of way when it's really not going to be paid for. Contractor's not going to,
One last question. Did you get a chance to look at the lighting that they're using in the Pines? Do you know if that's full cutoff?
I didn't, and unless I see it at night, unless you see it at night, you really don't know. I mean, you can see a light with a hood, and it may be rated, but I don't know. So unless I find the manufacturer and figure out what that lighting is, I can talk to Bill. What's the gentleman's name? To speak with down at the Pines. I interviewed with him, and I'm gapping his name.
Mark Dixon.
Mark Dixon. He knows the name of that light. If you want, I can pull his cut sheet.
No, I should just I can email Mark.
Okay.
I should just email Mark and find out more.
Is there anyone who would entertain a motion? And just to kind of recap what the motion would really be, would be an acceptance of the plan, of the concept, and moving forward with the expenditure of dollars that we've already approved, but with the intention of seeing something back that is more complete, and then with a final approval. And this would be go to council next week.
I would make that motion.
Okay, so we've got a motion by Heather, and we've got a second by Robert. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Danielle.
I guess there's a couple of pieces to this that don't yet fit together, and I look forward to seeing it fit together. We're pulling budget. We've got, we're $100,000 short. My question is, what gets cut? And I think that's a relevant question for the council to have if we get to that point. So, we're talking about in the first phase, 7K of boulders, 7K of banners, 10K of sculpture, 40K of sculpture at 10,000 a piece. I consider that a rough estimate. Is there a way that we can do this within our budget and preserve it? And if we have to cut something, what's going to cut? So I guess it feels like we should have that level of conversation at some point, whether it's next week or now. Because we don't have the money to do this yet. We haven't figured out how to do it.
Well, I will say that what Bill has proposed is a couple of delaying 2 projects, and that, and then $50,000 for the sidewalks out of our fund that we already have, and then the remaining 100 is yet to be determined. But that could be approached with the use of ad alternates, so that if the construction budget comes in under, then you've got that 30% of contingency that could be used for those ad alternates. So I think we're sitting a little prettier than what we might think, given what Bill's proposed in terms of delaying some of the projects. And it wouldn't be that these projects would not be done. It just would be simply that we as a council would be choosing to prioritize them.
I would also, 30%, again, you have to understand that we have not, it's conceptual. We've taken an area that's approximately 400 feet long, and we're trying to associate costs to an area that's 900 feet or 1,200 feet long. So until you allow us the time to actually start to work out the details and actually finalize, we have to put a contingency of that large amount. Now, I know Bill said that traditionally, when you put a $700,000 budget down and you're coming in, traditionally that's what the budget is. I would like the leeway to at least get this concept into the full corridor from Florida to Colorado and start really figuring out what exactly we're talking about as far as cost. I don't think we'll really know that until we get into the next stage of design. Right now, there's a contingency. There's a lot of variables. We don't know how many bike racks are going to be. We don't know how many sculptures are going to be, because that steering committee has not told us what is actually going to go in yet. How many boulders are going to come out? That could be a swing of $80,000. We don't know. So those are things that we need to really kind of wait on until we get into further phases.
The clerk, though, just advised me that this is a motion that does not have to go to council, because since we're not actually authorizing the expenditure of funds at this moment, that it would be simply a motion that would be approved tonight, and that would authorize our staff to proceed with concept, design, and development, then to bring something back to us later. Heather, is that okay with you if we make that bit alteration to your motion?
Yes, that's fine. If I could state the reason I made that motion.
Sure.
I believe that since we've had so many people involved in this planning that it would be appropriate to say that there's a cohesiveness among people and businesses, constituents, and among staff. And so that's the primary reason I made that motion.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the table, and we have a second. Is there further discussion? Bill?
Just a comment to help clarify a little bit Councilmember Chenoweth's concern. We'll be far enough along in the design come May and June, whatever, that we'll get a better feel for costs. Before we go out to bid, we'll even have a engineer's probable cost of construction anyway. And then in that June, probably maybe into the next fiscal year time frame, we may have to do a budget amendment or see where that is. If we need that extra $100,000, we don't want to cut anything, we really want to go ahead, then again we have that discussion of, well, then what doesn't happen, what does happen. But things will crystallize better in 6 months from now as to that cost versus right now it's pretty fuzzy.
Dennis?
Bill, one of the construction projects that was indicated that might be postponed is construction along Main Street near Learman. What's the state of the road there? It seems to me that that's been delayed once already, and maybe I remember wrongly, but is that a project that if we delay it for 2 more years, we're not really talking about serious road reconstruction yet, or what's your concerns? You have the other one, North Shore Drive. I know that's in the very far edge of the northern part of the city, and it services basically some empty fields and a few businesses up there. I don't know what the truck, weight, use of that road is, but Main Street's a little more of a concern because of Learman. So can you address that?
I have to check my capital improvement plan to know when it was first identified. If it's 1 or 2 years delay or what have you, I'd have to give you an answer on that. But it is showing distress now, some potholes, some street maintenance activities. Ideally, what would happen now to postpone it is just going to add a little bit more of those maintenance activities. It's not going to, in our opinion, going to go to the point where we need to reconstruct the streets, but there may be some full depth patches here or there that come about that maybe could have been avoided. So I can't say there won't be additional costs by delaying it 2 years. There probably will be certainly maintenance costs, maybe some more when we actually do the road work costs that way. So that's just inherent in delaying a road that's starting to see distress signs. North Shore Drive, those businesses, actually I think it's full businesses both sides of the street. I don't think there's any empty lots. Maybe there's one lot, but they have for years been asking about a road. It's a chip and seal road, very poor condition. It was a companion project with a new sanitary sewer. Some of those businesses are on private septic, not a good situation. They really need to get off that and into a public sanitary sewer. So we were going to do this public sanitary sewer and street reconstruction at the same time. They've been very patient up there. Occasionally I get questions asked when it's going to happen. So
those are just the hard decisions we have to make.
Just hard decisions you have to make.
And I guess I would say, just in response to that, I think that this Philo Road expenditure is an investment in our economic future. And I think, in order for us to take this step, I think it can make a difference in terms of our overall tax base and drawing businesses. So it seems like it's a even though that's tough stuff, and it probably will cost us a little more in maintenance, and it will delay the response that we have to those property owners. I think that our economic development needs to be a priority. Other comments? Brandon?
I just had one comment about the Bike and Ped Commission review. We did talk about it at last Wednesday's meeting. We didn't actually see the whole design of things that were off the street or where the bike parking would go, but we looked at the street design that Jennifer Selby, one of the engineers, had done of where the lanes go and the tough transition from the lane to the side path, how we can make that safer and make it clear to people. That's a really tricky spot. So we can get you the minutes. They're not written up yet, but they will be. Our next meeting is in February, and I guess I would encourage Bill and Garrett, as the project goes along, when it gets to the next phase and you have more detailed plans, to run the diagrams and the next sketches by the Bike Commission again for comments on things like bike parking and lanes.
Charlie?
Yeah, and with respect to biking, as an alternative to the difficult transition at the Colorado and Philo intersection, what about the possibility of a bike lane just on the west side of Philo from Colorado to Windsor? In other words, you'd have one on, it's easy for the bikes on the east side to move to the side path. It's a lot harder on the west side. And I don't know if there might be space to put in a 5-foot bike lane on the west and still maintain the configuration. And Bill may know that off the top of his head.
Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor of the motion as noted by Heather, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your
You have a good
participation.
evening.
Okay, our next item on the agenda is with regard to Menards. And Robert, I believe you'll be delivering that. And actually, the individual who signed up for public comment is actually our presenter for Menards. So isn't that correct, Mr. O'Neill?
Yes. Right.
Okay, all right. So Robert, you first, and then you'll take it from there.
Robert, I'm going to join you now in case there's questions. Sounds good. Thanks for your patience here. All right. This is I'm Robert Myers, Planning Manager with the City of Urbana. And I'm here tonight with Tom O'Neill from Menards Incorporated, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Menard, Inc., actually, who operates the Menards store chain, which is the third largest home improvement store chain in the United States. And we're here tonight to give you an overview of a proposed development in the Route 130 corridor that would include property that Menards owns. And this has been a process that we've been working on for almost a couple of years now. Menard, just to give you a quick background, tonight is an informal review. No applications have been submitted at this time, but we thought it would be best to give everyone some background about what's coming and to provide an opportunity for some feedback. So tonight is informal review, a study session, asking for feedback. And then later we'll have formal reviews, formal submittals. An annexation agreement would come first. In the annexation agreement, Plan Commission would review that, and then the annexation agreement would come here to you. In that annexation agreement, we'd be looking at things including zoning and development expectations, and also in terms of cost sharing agreements as well. And then finally, we'd have our subdivision applications. The Plan Commission would review plats, make recommendations, and those plats would then come here for final approval. But one aspect is that these Menards would like to know up front whether or not their plats would be generally acceptable to the Plan Commission, and so the plats would also be part of the annexation agreement as well. I'm going to skip this actually, but just so everyone is thinking about it, we do have a number of well, we have a framework, a development framework that we have. We have development guidelines, development controls, development guidelines. We have 2005 comprehensive plan. We just finished the High Cross Road Route 130 corridor plan that you all reviewed. And then we have what I call development controls, which is the Urbana zoning ordinance and then the subdivision and land development ordinance. We've been working hard over the last couple of years to make sure that what Menards submits is in accordance with our guidelines and development controls, both of those. To give you a quick overview, Menard Inc. purchased the property at a land auction in the fall of 2005, and so now they own about 357 acres on 7 tracts.
And some of that is Mr. Waldschmidt's. That
Yes.
incorporates that.
Right.
So we don't own.
Okay. Tom was, it just reminded me that some of that does include a tract just south of the existing Walmart. It's owned by Mr. Waldschmidt, and that would be become part of this development proposal. You'll notice that it straddles both the west and east side of Route 130 corridor, and towards the top you'll see the Walmart store. So this is just south of the Walmart store, behind it, and then across the roadway into the south. About half of the property is in unincorporated county and half in the city, but Menards would annex that portion that's now in the county. What they're proposing is both commercial and residential development, and I'd say the first aspect of the development would be a Menards store itself, and that at this point would it be anticipated to open in the spring of 2010. That's under review right now. It has to get in the pipeline for Menards store openings. They have a yearly list that they work with. And just so everyone will know, they're proposing a range of residential development, including detached single-family residential, townhomes, condominiums, but it would not include apartments. It would include single-family housing, both detached and attached. The full build-out would be 10 years or more. So we're talking about a long-term project. The development tracts that we're speaking about specifically, we're looking south. This is an aerial photograph, obviously, looking south. And tonight we'll be talking about different tracks, A1, A2, B1, B2. That white square in the bottom portion of the screen, that's the existing Walmart store. Behind that, there's you'll see that there's a detention basin, and below that tracks A1 and A2. The A1 tract is where the Menards store would go, and then behind that would be attached townhomes or condominiums. Across this Route 130 on the B1 and B2, commercial, at this point pretty well unspecified, would occur at that location. Tract C1 to the south is we're anticipating retail. At this point, the concept is for larger retail establishments. And then behind that, next to Savannah Green, looking at a range of housing options, everything from smaller lot, single-family residential, sort of like you see in Savannah Green, to single-family residential oriented around single-family homes, oriented around detention basins, the water features, and then finally right behind the anticipated retail would be attached housing, either townhomes or condominiums. This really reiterates that, and it specifies the number of acreage, and we're looking at roughly 50-50 in terms of commercial and residential. There'll be a little more residential than commercial. And again, this is in the packet that's been provided to you, but this is an overview. Real quick, the plans do comply with the 2005 comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan not only deals with land use, but also makes sure that as we grow, we're well connected. And that's where the mobility map comes into play. It does comply with a comprehensive plan mobility map. We're working through an issue for the extension of Tapman Drive extended towards the east. So that's something that will be dealt with through the annexation agreement, through the plans that are actually presented in the annexation agreement. But we're aware of that issue, and we're working on that. We should also let you know that sidewalk and trail system has been thought about extensively, and there would be an integrated network of sidewalks and trails. This actually shows the sidewalks and trails. This illustration shows the sidewalks and trails that would provide internal circulation. This plan that you have in your packet does not show the crosstown routes, essentially. But when you lay the crosstown routes over this plan, they do connect together. There is, if there are any gaps that are present, we'll be sure and address that. But there's an important concept here that you all should know about. They would like to provide really extensive trail system, which is interesting because not only developer surveys, but also the Park District surveys are being done in both Champaign and Urbana. One of the #1 things that people are looking for are trails. They're really motivated by trails and interested in trails. Here they're providing much more than you would see in a typical development. But part of the concept is that in some places, off-road trails would be provided in lieu of on-street sidewalks. The concept is that every lot would have they would either front on a sidewalk or a trail, but some places there would be a trail in lieu of a sidewalk. In addition to that, they've shown in this illustration, which is in your packet, Route 130 corridor, we have approximately $500,000 grant that the city has received to build a multi-use trail, side path if you want to call it, on the west side of Route 130, and these plans will take that into account as well. To get to the necessary infrastructure improvements, the main chunk, if you want to call it that, of infrastructure improvements, the main thing that we'll be dealing with, Menards has not only been working really closely with the City of Urbana staff, but all sorts of other overview entities, such as Illinois Department of Transportation. This development would really require the widening of an improvement of Route 130 between University Avenue and Florida Avenue extended to add additional lanes. We'll talk about the anticipated costs in just a moment, but the basic concept is widening of Route 130, extending Florida Avenue to Route 130, and then also widening Washington Street as well. This question is asked a lot. Does the developer, are they requiring, are they expecting, are they anticipating a new interchange on the interstate? With High Cross Road, are they banking on interstate on High Cross Road on the interstate? And the answer is no, that Menards has told us that if that should happen, that would be fine in terms of traffic volumes, but they're not anticipating that will happen. They're not expecting it to happen. The other question that we've received is, can this development be served by existing sewer system? Is this going to require the east side interceptor that's been planned, that's in the planning stages? The answer is no, it won't require the east side interceptor to be built, although I anticipate that the development is occurring kind of at the top of the hill for gravity-fed sewer as it's flowing down towards the sewer treatment plant. So when you get much beyond this development towards the east, I think future development really will need that east side interceptor. But probably about 75 to 80% of the development will just use gravity-fed sewer, and the track behind the Menards store would use a temporary private lift station until the east side sewer interceptor is extended. In terms of paying for Route 130 improvements, I did want to preface this by saying we have a provisional working idea, but obviously it's it's all subject to your review and approval. So I don't want you to think that you're being cut out of the process by any means, but we thought it was wise to bring something to the table in terms of what both parties what we believe we can agree upon. What we're suggesting to council, which would again be formalized through an annexation agreement, is that Menard's proposed share, that the cost would be about $8 million for widening of Route 130 to 4 lanes, including turn lanes and including a divided roadway. Menard's proposed share will be $4.5 million approximately, and others' proposed share, including the city, would be about $3.5 million. And provisionally, the city would reimburse to Menard's up to, over a 10-year period, up to $3.5 million in sales taxes from new commercial development, and then recoup a proportional share from adjoining properties when those are developed. In other words, if there's let's just say a neighbor of Menard's is not involved in any of this development, but in the future they come and they say, wow, all this infrastructure has been built, this is great, my property values are now much higher, it's made development able to happen. In the past, I'd never been interested in development, but now I am. It really wouldn't be fair to have the entire burden, we feel like, of all of the costs to be borne by Menard's and the city and what entities would participate right up front. So what we'd like to do is capture, as those other properties are developed in the future, capture from that development as they're annexed into the city, recapture provision for some of this cost share. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tom and Neil. And the only thing I'd like to preface this with, it's been really great working with Tom and Menard's. It's actually been wonderful in a lot of ways. I've valued the fact that I've always felt like that that you're being upfront, and I like the fact that also whenever we've been dealing with Tom, he's been very careful to not overstate what necessarily can be delivered, but to be really exact. And yeah, we can do this. We don't think we can do this. I think that's been important. So I've enjoyed that.
Thank you, Robert. A few more years and we'll be able to share children's photographs together and mailing lists and Christmas lists. And, again, I'm Tom O'Neill with Menard's. For the record, our address is 4777 Menard Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I'm here on behalf of Menard's, obviously, because of the project that we've been working on for some time. Robert's given a pretty comprehensive detail of the history. I guess there's a few more things I'd like to touch on from a Menard's perspective before we go into detail on the project itself. Hopefully everybody's familiar with Menard's, with our presence in Champaign. Menard's is we call ourselves a building material, home improvement supply store. Again, like Robert said, we consider ourselves the third largest retailer when it comes to those types of home improvement building material type goods behind Lowe's and Home Depot. One of the advantages we feel we have, in addition to wearing that hat as a retailer, is as a privately held company we have an ability to be multidisciplinary, and we seem to have a penchant for real estate development. And we like to capitalize off opportunities when it comes to developing our own real estate, both from a commercial perspective, ensuring that we control the things that go in and around us, protect our view corridors into our stores, but also from a residential perspective. And in recent years, we've been working more to put together mixed-use developments because obviously as a building materials retailer, there's some benefits to be recouped by having an immediate source of residential lots behind one of our stores. Again, based out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, we are Midwestern in our roots, and Midwestern in the area of the stores that we have about 235 stores in 11 states. And as we've grown, as we've expanded, the greater Champaign-Urbana area has been obviously very good to us. In Champaign, we had a store. It was a good enough store that we had to replace it. The store we replaced it with over time, we outgrew it. We had to expand it with a garden center and warehouse expansion. So just this whole litany of expansion within the greater trade area sort of has led us to where we are now, where about 3 years ago we identified the fact that we believe that there's room in the market for a complementary store from our standpoint to serve the greater Champaign area in a better manner. From a development perspective, again, we're going back in time here a little bit. We have been working with the city for about 3 years. We initially came to the city to try and identify areas of growth, areas of expansion where we could look for stores. We learned about the upcoming auction of the Pfeffer Farm, participated in that auction, and purchased that property. Now, that's an unusual way for us to buy property. Usually we like to get under contract and go through the approval process, and when we're ensured that we can build a Menards store, then we close on the property. But we've owned that property for over 2 years in the city and outside the city, I suppose. Knowing that a project of this size, this scope, this scale was going to take a significant amount of time and effort and due diligence to work with staff, work with the city, work with all the other permitting authorities to get us through to the goal line of ensuring that we had an approved development to move forward on. From a timing perspective, 3 years ago is not today, and we frankly don't have a set schedule in mind as far as when we're going to move forward with the construction of the store. Because of our need to slate stores for store openings, our schedule of stores for 2009 has already been completed, and we haven't come up with a schedule of stores that we're going to or proposing to open in 2010. But as that is arrived at, I'll be able to provide more information on that aspect. With that, I'd like to go into the project details a little bit, and I'd be happy to entertain questions at any time from council members. But as Robert alluded to, from a Menard Incorporated ownership perspective, it was a bit of a misnomer in the statement that we own 357 acres. We actually own about 308, 310, and the rest of the property is property that we're working in conjunction with Mr. Waldschmidt out of Peoria, and is included in our final platting effort. But some of those properties are not necessarily currently in Menard Incorporated ownership, but likely will be. Again, we're looking at mixed-use commercial and residential development. We've divided into a number of different, we call them tracks, based on the side of the road they're on. We have the track A1, which is on the east side of High Cross. This is the area that we're proposing to build the Menards store on. If you look at the different aerials here, that would be this area here, facing west back towards High Cross. In conjunction with that, we're talking about the dedication of publicly dedicated road across the frontage, and working in conjunction with Mr. Waldschmidt as far as that goes. Because of the nature of having property on both sides of High Cross and the extent to which we have different uses, we're looking at ultimately, I mean, it's a big project. So will it all go in at once? No. What our goal is to get feedback, continue to work with staff, get to a point where we have an approval of a project where we can go forth with a Menards store, and at the same time we'd like to do all the grading activities for the project. It only makes sense from an economic standpoint to do it as a one lump sum project from a grading standpoint. We don't want to be in a position where we have to bring material in from outside sources or haul material off. We also don't want to be in a position where we have to transport material across High Cross. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So our engineers have been instructed to utilize the material that is being excavated from the pond construction or the proposed pond construction of the residential areas to build up the commercial areas, the Menards store site, in a way that the east side of the road ends up in a balance where there's no net gain or loss of material from that side of the site. And in addition, on the west side of High Cross, we're looking at a similar situation where we're not going to be doing a lot of grading to the commercial component here, but the areas up here where we're again creating ponds, this material is needed to the south into this proposed residential area over here to again end up with no net loss or gain of material. overall, from a residential and commercial standpoint, we're looking for, again, the initial development of a Menards store. In your package, you'll see a proposed site plan for the store. We've generated that site plan for purposes of being able to allow our engineers to continue work as far as storm sewer layout, utility layouts, where the grades at which the Menards store will be constructed in order to allow us to get to this material balance on the property. And if you'd like, we can get into detail about what we're proposing from a Menards store perspective as well. The store, again, would be facing to the west towards High Cross. We're looking at constructing a store of about 162,000 square feet of heated retail area, and with ancillary garden center overhangs and accessory structures within our lumber yard area. Our total building permits that we pull is about 230,000 square feet. What this enables us to do is, from a use perspective, we believe that there's several ways that we separate ourselves from our competition. We like to think that our stores are built out instead of up. So inside our stores, you won't see the extensive floor-to-ceiling racking that you see in some other traditional building material supply stores. We think that's more of an open concept. It makes the stores more well-lit and easier to shop, allows wider aisles, and a better ability to put together bathroom displays, model kitchens, model baths, those types of things. More amenities rather than very tight floor-to-ceiling racking systems. The other thing that we do as a retailer to separate ourselves from our competition is the extent to which we have our lumber yard. We have about 4 acres that's enclosed with a treated material fence, which is opaque in nature, to keep light within it, to keep sound within it, to keep all of our building materials within that area, and ensure that we impact our neighbors to the least extent possible. It's a big project, and I don't know the level of detail which I should get into with the council at this point without getting first some feedback as to what areas are important to the council. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Comments, let's start here. Charlie, we'll just go right down the line.
Well, thanks, Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you.
I guess I'm disappointed that we have to wait till 2010.
Yeah, what can we do to move it up?
Is there any chance to get a cancellation slot in 2009? And if not, how can we sort of guarantee a 2010 date?
That decision is out of my hands. Okay. I can certainly the fact that the community is that interested plays a role, and I'll certainly reflect those concerns and desires. But as far as the project is so massive from a permitting standpoint and from a land use impact standpoint and from all the necessary discussions and engineering plans that need to be generated, that it's just not feasible to feel comfortable in slating a store for a 2009 opening, knowing that I really should be under construction right now in order to guarantee that I can be open in 2009.
But if we just make progress, then at the rate we're going, do you think we can get a 2010 opening? Is that?
I wish I could guarantee that to you, but I don't know. I believe so.
Okay. We are great believers in the ability of our staff to work miracles here, so they're under the gun. A couple of sort of related issues. One is that the road construction concerns me, and it really bothers me that the state requires all these things and then they have no money to help us out. Have we made any progress with the state or with our federal representatives to help us out there?
I don't think this involves federal money, right? So there is a problem with that, but not for this project. We have asked our state representative and our senator to include this if they get a capital bill. They are not near to getting a capital bill, but they might have a bare bones thing put together. So we are definitely working on that.
So the capital bill is important to us then. Okay, good.
Tom, do you have a comment? Did you want to address that?
Just on that issue, Robert already discussed this to some extent, but that's the basis of our cost share arrangement, is that we are in effect fronting not just neighboring property owners, but we are fronting what we consider the state's portion through that sales tax sharing agreement. And then we are going to then aggressively pursue the state for the state's portion, as well as neighboring property owners. So that's the basis of the cost share.
Great. In terms of the time, I know Walschmidt has some ideas too. Is their construction tied to your construction, or will they start before or after you?
I would say that we've held them up to this date. If it wasn't for the fact that they've been working with us and ensuring a cohesive layout, they would have went ahead with Walmart and they would have built their initial center in their development. But because we desired more of a cohesive retail development, we wanted to ensure connectivity to Tapman. We implored Russ to wait on his, to realign his store. Once, if and when we're in a position to have a final approval, I believe Russ is probably more poised to move ahead than we are.
Okay.
His timing is easier on a smaller building such as that.
Yeah. Long term, how do we avoid having this whole area turn into something like the nightmare on Prospect, on North Prospect?
I think the initial response to that is the fact that we are Menard Incorporated with our retailer hat. We'll take that off for a second. We'll put our real estate developer hat on. We are master planning about a mile of corridor here, and in conjunction with that, we put together a very comprehensive traffic impact study with the state. We have an approved intersection design study, and it's not a situation that you'd find on North Prospect where each individual 10-acre chunk would come together or come in with its individual proposal for that property, but we're looking at the owner of a mile of frontage coming forth with a plan for a mile of boulevarded frontage with locations for signalized accesses as well as right-in, right-out accesses detailed from the get-go.
Okay.
Bill?
Just to add to that, the fact that we'll have, I'll call them frontage roads, but there'll be public streets on both sides of High Cross Road will be very helpful with the appropriate geometry. We're coordinating, working with MTD as to bus access, bicycle access, pedestrian access. So we're looking at all modes of access of transportation to the businesses and homes in the area. And lastly, an important component is just access control. We're not allowing curb cuts and signals to be installed, every 1,000 feet or whatever, but there's quarter mile or greater spacing between signals. So all that should help provide for a better traffic flow through the area.
Okay. And then my last general area is sort of on the environmental aspects. I appreciate the sensitivity to bike and pedestrian stuff here. Washington is a major east-west corridor for bicyclists going in and out of town. The sports bicyclist, we can say, and really hoping to encourage commuting out to, shopping by bicycle or whatever, to this area. One of the things that I get asked from my constituency, and I represent a constituency close to the center of town, is the availability of green hardware, which is hard to come by. And I don't know if Menards is interested in that, but they would find, I think, a community here eager for products along those lines. And since I have your ear, I'm going to put in a plug. At the same time, the flip side of that is green construction of both your building and other construction, and in this whole area that you're doing, as an opportunity here to do a lot of green construction, and has Menard Inc. Considered that, and what do they do along those lines?
While we've not pursued LEED certification with our building, from a commonsensical standpoint, we do, at least we believe, a lot of things from an energy saving standpoint from a sustainability standpoint, from a cost saving standpoint, from just a long-term maintenance standpoint internal to our buildings. We provide skylights in our buildings. The exterior construction of our stores is of a very highly rated insulated panel. All the buildings our stores are have a pretty sophisticated temperature control system to ensure very little fluctuations, taking advantage seasonal and time of day constraints. So we do a lot of things internal to our stores from a cost savings perspective. And I'm not sure if that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, well, it's, like some of the materials that you would use, not only what materials, but might you stock, for example. I know, for example, bamboo flooring is becoming very popular. I haven't, since I'm not in the market, I haven't checked to see if your Champaign store carries that, but things like that, renewable items that would help address some of the requests that I get from my constituents. And then, of course, what kind of materials you would be using in building your homes and such in the housing portion of your development. We're interested in increasing energy efficient homes, for example, and what kind of construction techniques you use and so on. We've got a couple of trial, and it's mentioned here earlier, this Farr Associates development that we're doing on North Cunningham, which we're trying to have 75% efficient homes as a possibility, that sort of thing. There's construction techniques that are being used to get that level.
I'm going to need to get some further answers as to some of those questions. Just to, I want to bring up one statement though. When it comes to the residential component of the development, we would consider ourselves a developer. We don't want to be we're not a builder of homes. We don't want to compete with people that are shopping our stores. So we're going to be looking for builders locally within the community to develop relationships with. They would actually be building the homes on the lots that we quote-unquote develop.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome.
Danielle?
Thanks. I'll just reiterate that we're highly motivated for a 2010 opening. I actually purchased $25,000 worth of materials from Menards 2 years ago, and it hurt me that I couldn't spend my dollars in Urbana. So I also am very impressed with the pedestrian connections in this. I think we're actually lined up to really avoid the North Prospect phenomenon with monument signs, no billboards, trails and bike access, a master planning process that takes the whole piece into consideration instead of just, piece by piece figuring it out as you go along, and the limited on-off on 130, and also the fact that it's circular. There's inputs from two sides instead of one like North Prospect has. I think I want to underline what Charlie said, which is to really look, to urge you to look at the market for energy efficient homes in this community. I think you'll find we're a very progressive community. I think folks are really looking for, especially with energy costs, what they are looking for green building technologies. And so, probably you're doing a market analysis just to look at what kind of housing is supported in this area, in addition to the size of houses, which you've been looking at. Also the kind of quality of construction and construction materials. So I would just urge you in your market analysis to know that we're somewhat of a distinctive community that way, and you might find that there's some direction there from consumers that will help you to determine what the quality of construction that you want to use. Let's see. We need a bookstore. I know you can't really deliver us a bookstore, but I'm just going to put that out there. One of the things, since you're new to the community in some ways, is we have more master's degrees and PhDs than, it will floor you, and if you get those statistics and you look at the level of education of our community, it's unbelievable. And Urbana doesn't have a new bookstore that is of a broad variety. I believe there's a Christian bookstore and a used bookstore. So we could really use a new bookstore, and I think we have all the consumer need for that. So if you could take that back to Eau Claire, I'd appreciate it. I had a couple of questions. The first is looking at the sidewalks issue. Is the sidewalk in the residential area connected to the street, or is there the right-of-way landscaping in between where there's a buffer? I couldn't really tell from what we were looking at in terms of the design.
Right-of-way buffer. There would be an area of green space in between the street and the sidewalks.
Okay, and then the second question is, do you know if the request, I mean, I'm interested in this idea of a combination of sidewalk and trails, and it looks like it's quite a bit of sidewalk and trails. Do you know if it's a decrease from what we would, of lineal feet from what we would typically require? Robert, maybe you know the answer to this question. Is it a decrease or is it generally on par in terms of linear feet?
We actually looked at that. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a plan put together that showed the actual lineal feet that would be required via the subdivision control ordinance versus what's been proposed. And it is my recollection that total lineal feet, we were slightly beyond what would have otherwise been required. And if you take into account the fact that the bimodal path, bike path, is actually wider, then you're really looking at a substantial increase of, well, I guess, paved area, but I mean, at the same time, it serves a definite function that I think everybody agrees is beneficial.
Yeah, and that's what it looked like, and I think that really fits the consumer market here in terms of what people are looking for. They're definitely looking for trails and recreation opportunities. Let's see, and there isn't at this point any request for any variances in our landscape requirements for the parking, for example. Is that correct? That there will be a fully landscaped parking for the parking lots of the stores?
We have yet to date come up with a site-specific landscaping plan for you folks for your consumption. We'll bring that back with us with our full application. We are not anticipating any variances from those requirements. The variances that we have anticipated already worked into the draft annexation agreement. I don't believe there's anything landscaping related to them in those requests. One of the things as a retailer that we think is a benefit is the fact that, okay, let's look at the size of our store. The heated retail area is 160,000 square feet. The total amount of building permit square foot that we have is about 230,000 square feet. Well, even at the 160, if you applied a traditional 5 per 1,000 parking formula to our use, that would require about 800 parking spaces. Well, we know we don't need that. We can judge based on historical use. We can judge based on the fact that most retailers are looking to supply a parking lot that serves their, Thanksgiving to Christmas time rush. We're a spring and summer merchant primarily. Most retailers have traditional on-the-rack retail. We have wide open store that has model kitchens, model baths, thing that you really can't apply a traditional formula to. So we're providing a parking lot that's a lot more tailored to our use at about 450 parking spaces instead of 800. And we think that's to our advantage as well as the community's.
And that actually gets my last comment, and then I'll turn over the floor, which is, I think this council would be very amenable if you wanted to put in fewer parking spaces and have a kind of wait-and-see approach. In fact, in the past, I believe we even considered an ordinance with the last council along these lines, whereby, if you felt like our parking requirements were too high, I think we should discuss that, and you could look at putting in fewer parking spaces and then having green space that you could grow into if you needed to. I certainly can't speak for the whole council, but I do think that we certainly don't want to see more parking than is needed in a place, and we know that that's one of the visual impacts and ecological impacts of a big box store is the parking and all the runoff from that. So we'd want to minimize that as much as possible.
Well, from our perspective, we think that's one of the benefits that we bring come forward both as a real estate developer as well as a retailer. In a lot of instances, we see developers trying to speak for retailers, and to make the path of least resistance all that much easier, they say, okay, we'll just put in the parking lot that's required by ordinance. Well, we know we don't need that, but we do want to tailor our parking lot to the number of parking spaces we think we historically do need, and that's about what's reflected on that site plan that's in your packet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, the mayor.
Well, when we had the big land auction, I was living in fear that the Chinese government was going to buy all that land. So we were really happy when Menards bought it. And I went out and got a snowblower from your Champaign store, which probably means that there won't snow anymore this year. But anyway, we're very excited about your plans.
I appreciate that, Mayor.
Robert?
Well, I was really trying to think of what my constituents might want at Menards, just to throw it on the table, but I really can't think of anything right off the top. But I do appreciate your presentation and the thoroughness in which Menards is looking at this whole project, and I think it will be beneficial to the entire community as you move forward. I've seen some other proposals made, and by far this is one of the most extensive studies that I've seen from a store in terms of looking at what they're going to do in over a period of time. And I think I applaud you for that.
I appreciate that.
Brandon?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to thank you as well. There's a lot of great features in this plan as I look at it. The fact that you're doing master planning, that we're solving the traffic problem, so this will be a corridor where there are not traffic jams, that you are doing things like reducing the parking, and that this development will really be compatible and supportive of what's surrounding it. The fact that you, next to Savannah Green, talked about doing smaller lot sizes and matching the intensity of Savannah Green, but then next to Stone Creek, the fact that you would do larger lot sizes and match the intensity of Stone Creek, that's really the Urbana philosophy, that when stores and developments come, we really want to match and be good neighbors and be compatible development.
Well, you have to realize there's some self-motivation to that as well. We don't want to have a single residential product out there. What we're looking for is to have various residential products that are available to different income levels, that are available to different lifestyles. And so that's why you see the adjacent to Stone Creek, you'll see some larger lots. Adjacent to Savannah Green, you'll see we're looking for transition, and we're looking to make it gradual and again, cohesive and still fit in the landscape ultimately of what we foresee while working with staff and coming up with a plan for this.
Great. And I also wanted to thank staff for, 2 years ago when this land was up for auction, being really proactive about putting together a packet of our design criteria and guidelines that are actually above what our normal ordinances are. So the quality of this development and the quality of this planning effort is really above what we would just normally require because it's an annexation. Yeah, right. This is so much better than what we would normally get. So I thank you all for this effort. Yeah, until we change our ordinance. There's one aspect I wanted to ask about that I have a question or concern I wanted to share. I know this is all preliminary, the sidewalk piece especially, and you want feedback on it. In general, I really like the paths, the connections. People want that. People want to be able to get out and walk. The one concern I have about it is with some of the gaps in sidewalks that are along arterials and collectors. So, for example, along Washington, at least as I look at the map, and I know it's preliminary and it might change, but I just want to throw the feedback out there. Along things like Washington, which is really an arterial street that people from all over the city use to get across Urbana, there are a couple places where along housing developments there isn't a sidewalk shown because, those houses have sidewalks on the rear. And, I live on Florida, it's an arterial street as well, and I think, well, if there were a path in my backyard, that still wouldn't be reason to take out the sidewalk in my front yard because Florida is a major arterial that goes across town and people use that to get the whole way across town. So the one piece of this, and maybe it's just not shown on the diagram, but a piece that I would really need to see as we get into approval in order to support it, would be that along arterial streets like Washington, we can't leave out sidewalk gaps because it isn't just serving those homes, it's really serving the whole community.
One of the things I would say to that is relates to Washington. There is a gap that we identified and that we are rectifying, and that's the gap in between on the west side of High Cross, in between 130 and the first frontage road on the south side of Washington. Because that portion of Washington is necessitated as a result of both the High Cross road improvements as well as the commercial development of that Tract C on the west side of High Cross. That's the component of Washington, and we consider the sidewalks adjacent to Washington part of that improvement. As you go further west, since that part is then the residential area, and it's actually, we anticipate that tract being developed from Florida northward towards Washington. And so only upon such time as we actually develop, say, the final phase of that portion of the residential, at that time, again, these things are still in a discussion with staff, but it was seen that would be the point at which additional Washington Street improvements would be needed further to the west, and that sidewalks would go in that component at that time. As to Florida, I can't recall what we discussed as far as the sidewalks there, Libby.
I was just...
Both sides?
Yeah, Florida, it looks like there are sidewalks, and I was using that as an example because I live on Florida, on a different part of town that's an arterial, and just as an example, if I had a path in the back, it wouldn't still make sense to take out the sidewalk in the front. I'm glad to hear that one piece of Washington would get fixed. To me, though, I think some plan, even in the other pieces of Washington, when this development goes in, are really needed because it's a cross-town thoroughfare for pedestrians and cyclists, and one way or another, on one side of the street, it seems like we have to be able to fill in some of those sidewalk gaps. There's also a couple streets in the interior of the neighborhoods, like there's a street called A Street that is in the southernmost quadrant nearest Stone Creek that doesn't have sidewalks on either side, it looks like. And those people do have paths in the back of their homes, which is a great amenity. But I think for people with, kids who want to bike up and down the sidewalk, or for people who need to be visited by people who use wheelchairs, and there has to be a way to get out of your car and get to a sidewalk to get up and down the street to get to the home that you want to visit, it's important on one side of the street or the other to have a sidewalk. So there's some of those gaps. The other one I would mention is on Tapman Court, next to the outlots that are north of your Menards store, where somehow it seems like people have to be able to get to those outlots and get to those stores from the court or from 130. And that's kind of a collector street for the neighborhood. And if there's a way to fill in that sidewalk gap, I think that's important for people walking there. Washington is definitely my top priority, though. But A Street and Tapman Court, I think, are places as well where the community benefit for a sidewalk is really there. The other thing I wanted to just mention, in general, the standards for this development are really high, and it's a quality development. I wonder, this is a question, some for you, Tom, and some, Robert, for you and our staff as well. How do you, Tom, as you sell these properties to, restaurants and stores that want to come in here, how do you guarantee that their development will be of the same quality as yours? Will there be covenants, or will we, as the city, individually work with all those property owners to make sure that things like the path from the street, you're doing this raised path from the street to your front door of Menards store here, which is a great idea, having a sidewalk kind of through the parking lot so that people can safely walk to the front door. That's wonderful. That's really forward-thinking. It's a best practice that other communities are adopting. How do we guarantee that quality of development happens when you sell these lots? Is that something you're doing through covenants, or that the city works on as lots are sold?
I think the benefit of us as a retailer/real estate developer in this instance is that we're master planning the overall development from a general standpoint, but that in no manner alleviates or takes away the requirements for individual specific developments to have to come in and obtain site plan approval for their individual developments as they seek approval from the city of Urbana. And in addition to that, we are pretty stringent in our own. It provides you folks no guarantees, of course, but we have our own site plan review that we require in selling property. It's more strict from the standpoint of the development that is immediately in front of our stores, and ensuring view corridors to our store and wanting attractive development that's in fitting with what was going immediately around us. But I think there's several layers there of protection. But primarily, the master planning process, I don't believe we've ever anticipated as forestalling future site plans from being seen by the city.
Yeah, we'll review those.
Yeah.
Okay, great. The last thing I just wanted to share a couple comments about the parking reduction, or the parking idea of banking parking space. I definitely support that. That waiver, the arguments you gave and the reasons for having the smaller parking lot size seem very valid, and that's a concept we support, or at least I personally support. The other point about green products, I just wanted to reiterate too. You know, Urbana is one of the top 10 green communities, and we have one of the top 10 great neighborhoods in the whole country in Urbana. And so people here have a mindset of green building and green products, and to the extent that that's part of the housing mix and part of the mix of the products on your shelves, I think you'll hit the market here really well. So again, thank you. Thanks for this early chance for feedback. The sidewalk issues, the one concern I wanted to share and pass on, but this is really exciting, and yeah, if I can shop there in 2010 or sooner, that'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Go ahead, Libby.
Sorry, I just wanted to try to respond to Brandon's questions on how we would view subsequent developments. We would, again, just as we have with Menards, look to our comprehensive plan guidelines, the High Cross Road corridor plan, and the design guidelines that were prepared. And in addition, we have the other documents that Robert mentioned in our zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance. We have a lot of tools, and so far these have been working well. With respect to the shortfall in parking, which is a nice change. Usually there's more parking than we require, and Lisa's been working on zoning analysis for the annexation agreement. This will actually be just a straightforward variance. We don't see, and neither does Menard see, a need for banking, since they do know exactly how much parking they'll need. The banking idea was incorporated into our zoning ordinance some time ago. We haven't used that, but it is in there as a tool to try to encourage reductions in parking. But this is something that Menards is requesting, and from a staff perspective, we have no problem including that as part of the annexation agreement. In terms of the specific comments on the connectivity of the sidewalks and bicycle paths, there was quite a bit of discussion at the Plan Commission about this, and we'll be looking at some modifications. The plan was also presented to BPAC to get some comments, and one of the tasks we'll be doing is trying to make sure it relates to that larger bicycle master plan that's being worked on. So that's definitely a work in progress.
Brandon, and then Dennis.
If I could just ask one follow-up to make sure I understand, about that issue of guaranteeing the sort of the high quality of development in these other outlots piece. There are some standards, some things Menard's done that are even better in terms of the quality of this development than our standard basic ordinances require. Things like the monument signs, things like the sidewalk from out in the sidewalk that goes to the front of the store so people can walk safely through the parking lot. Those aren't in the basic requirements, but this Menard store is doing them, and we want all the developments here to incorporate that quality of development and monument signs as well. So do we need to do anything with ordinances or requirements so that as these lots are developed, which is going to start happening soon, they can meet the standard quality of design and meet the sort of high threshold that Menards is setting for this corridor?
Well, we tried to start with more of a policy approach, and I think we've had great success in response to that policy approach, because you'll recall those guidelines were in an early form even during the auction, so we were quite clear what our expectations were, and that clarity carried through to the High Cross Road plan. And if we begin to experience problems implementing our policy guidelines, then we may need to take a harder stance, but that has not yet been the case in this area.
Dennis?
You'd almost think there'd be nothing left to be said, but I actually do have a few thoughts. Okay, I'm going to say, of course, that I do think that this is a very comprehensive plan. The city is looking forward to the development along the corridor. The fact that the corridor can be so well planned to such an extensive length is extremely useful to the city. We're looking at the connectivity of the side streets to the main thoroughfare, the bike trails, and commerce in general flowing smoothly. It wasn't real clear that I guess I didn't see that it was going to be definitely a boulevard. I've been hoping it would be a boulevard all along. So I assume that I'm correct on that issue. Is that correct? That High Cross would become a boulevard street of sorts?
Yes. Is that correct, Bill?
This is not my main question I have for you, but just in an aside, I might as well find this out.
It'd be better if we had a picture to show you, because I think if I asked all of you up here what a boulevard looks like, you'll probably have a different picture.
I did hear a divided highway.
What it is, what I can tell you is that we have a few opportunities for landscape medians, but it's not a continuous landscape median for cost and right-of-way issues. But where we don't have left turn lanes, and in between intersections, there's areas where you have a median space.
About how the width of
I don't
a
recall,
lane's
10
width?
feet, 12 feet wide or so,
Okay.
somewhere in that range. I don't recall exactly. But the point is, there are some opportunities for some green spaces, but it's not a continuous green boulevard look that you or someone else may be thinking of. So where we can make those opportunities, we are doing that, but it's not, it's mostly, you got 2 lanes in each direction. You've got dual left turn lanes like at Washington Street. You have a lot of right turn lanes. You got some pretty wide intersections. But in between the intersections, there are some opportunities for some green landscape.
Well, that's hopeful. Okay, I just had a couple other questions. Maybe my largest concern was what looks to me like a really different trend now suddenly in our city planning direction as far as sidewalks in subdivisions. I think it's interesting and progressive to accentuate the walking trail concept. But I was talking to Brandon Bowersox here just before the meeting started. I was away during the weekend. I didn't see the plans until last night around 9:30 when I got back. One of the first things I noticed was how few front of lot sidewalks are indicated in the subdivision areas of your developments. And the rationale, and I remember reading it, was a new concept, it was quoted, of offering more trails connected, and these would be in people's backyards. And so, of course, immediately I was wondering the direction of the city, and there had been a lot of discussion in previous plans that we've looked at, that all the new construction that we have in town, we want to establish and have good utilities, good sewer lines, and good pedestrian pathways, i.e. Sidewalks. And this conversation became one of the pivotal crux of a decision that the council made about 9 months ago when we evaluated the Brick Houses subdivision plat on North Airport Road. And we had a long discussion about how important it was to have sidewalks on new constructed streets in our towns, and went to great lengths to assure that at least we had some of those streets, that sidewalks on those streets. So now I see that we have kind of an entirely new direction, that we're willing to have entire streets with 40 lots on them, have no sidewalks on either side, because on one street there might be in the backyard a bike path. And so I have, I guess I'd like to get some input from the city staff people about this new direction. And I wasn't able to read the comments of the Planning Commission when they reviewed your document, because they weren't included in the pamphlets, our packets. So I'm very keen to know what their conversation was when they came up with the information about the sidewalk replacement. So nobody's really talked about this to the same degree. I just come noticing it. If this is a new direction the city was wishing to take for the future, I think, and this is like the first time that we're talking about it, I think, that maybe we need to be told that this isn't the new direction. I'm just kind of curious. I'm not demanding that we have a sidewalk in every instance. I just see this as a new trend that's establishing basically a new precedent. So if we're going to adopt it without too much discussion, I'm really kind kind of curious because of the lengthy discussions we've had in the past.
Libby?
I really don't see this as a new direction. I think this is a response to a specific vision that Menards has. I think what makes this development a little different than a lot of the subdivisions we've seen in recent years is the emphasis on the water features, and that provides an opportunity for these trails. And as Robert mentioned, there is a lot of desire. There are these trails around water features in some of these subdivisions in Champaign. They're very popular. So we, as staff, wanted to be able to accommodate that vision that Menards had for their residential areas, in addition to quite a bit of connectivity in the traditional mode along the street. And the result, of course, is a greater lineal and aerial of pathways and sidewalks. It's a work in progress. There was one plan commissioner who had extensive comments. Overall, the plan commission liked the hybrid proposal that was proposed. There were some specific suggestions to improve linkages, and I actually have some comments from a plan commissioner I received today. But overall, they really did like the mixture, and we will just make sure that it's cohesive and makes sense. And trying to, again, make a hybrid of traditional sidewalk plan with this recreational concept. And I think that we're close to doing that. I really don't feel that this is a change. I think it's something specific to this area because of the water features and the vision of the development. The brick houses, I believe, was yet a different circumstance, as that was a rural subdivision, and it didn't really fit all of our urban standards, a separate situation. I think we do need to learn lessons from the past when we have large areas of Urbana that we have traditional urban subdivisions developed without sidewalks, and it will be very difficult ever to reconstruct those sidewalks. So I think as planners, for many decades, we required sidewalks on both sides of the streets, and then we didn't for some decades. And then we started doing that again maybe 25 years ago, and it's been a bit of catch-up since then. So I think when we look at alternative plans, we need to be very careful and cautious, and that's what we're doing here.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think it's a significant new direction, actually, and I'm not saying it's a bad one. I just noticed that we're doing it. I would identify the same roads and streets that Brandon was mentioning as being kind of dubious as far as connectivity with walking. And I always wonder about accessibility. People, we talk a lot of. We've been changing out a lot of urban crosswalks as they enter the street to make them wheelchair accessible. So how a person who's disabled is able to get into their home is a concern to us. The other thing that I noticed, and I guess I had a concern perhaps originally, maybe I don't have quite as much of a concern right now, but I noticed that the high propensity of the residential development was designated for R4 and R5, except perhaps Lot C2. So I'm wondering, it looks like most of the places, 2/3 of the places where residential will be developed is going to be high density, and I'm wondering what impact it will have for other services within the community. I'm thinking about police and fire protection, and it would indicate that we are looking at a new high-density area of the city that's coming to us, and I'm just saying that, in the future, I like to kind of feel comfortable that we're going to be well-staffed as far as police speed handling new subdivisions. The last thing I want to mention is that all of the commercial development along High Cross is going to be B3, and I'm sure that makes sense. There are some business commercial development that will be adjacent to neighborhoods. I'm looking at Lot B2, which is on the west side of Lot B1, which is so it's sort of like in between a residential area and a designated B3 commercial development. And I'm just wondering if Menards or the city has had a discussion whether a B2 designation, which is more neighborhood business orientation, is of all use, or are we thinking of making, is this going to be a concentrated commercial area that will have complete development in that terms? The request was for a B3 development.
Yes.
Have you talked with the city about B2 at all?
We have not talked about different districts for that area. When it comes to the development plans that you see in your packet, you'll notice that the tracks B1, B2, there's not a lot of development infrastructure that is currently depicted for that area.
Right.
Because we question ourselves how best that property is going to develop. And when it came to tract A, where the A1, where the Menard store is, or tract C1 on the west side of High Cross, that seemed to set itself up well for some larger scale retail behind outlots on the frontage, separated by a publicly dedicated frontage road. Now, tract B1, B2 is not as conducive to that. So we've only depicted the entrances into that, and we would wait in the future for a subsequent smaller developer to come forth with an actual site-specific implementation plan for that area. But because of our uncertainties as to what it is, we have not really proposed anything or thought anything, frankly, through on that. And that's why we just generally ask for the similar zoning for that property as we have for the balance.
I see. Yes, Libby? Well, I noticed that, B3, usually you think of, a large lot, big box, or, serious development. And I'm just thinking of certain parts of this development scheme, could accommodate more neighborhood-friendly sized businesses. Yeah, Libby.
And that's certainly possible within the B3 and the design guidelines we discussed. Just referring back to the comprehensive plan, we did spend a lot of time in this area deciding what level of commercial, and the school district tract and the adjoining tract kind of have two designations shown. One is the regional business, and I take this moment to note that in our comprehensive plan, some of our commercial designations are circles rather than
I saw that
property lines.
Specifically, yes.
The reason we went with the circles is a node concept, and recognizing that those would expand or contract to fit logical property lines. So that's one opportunity at this northwest corner of Washington and High Cross, shown with the red of regional business, and then the other opportunity would be an expansion of we call it light industrial and employment centers, such as to the north. And I think the anticipation here would be more the regional business opportunity, but either would technically be consistent with the comprehensive.
So we don't lose that opportunity to have both. Okay. Well, I see these things because, I'm just curious about the direction we're taking. I'm totally supportive of your development. I'm just being an eye for the, and a voice for certain people.
It's a 300-acre development. If there weren't a few questions, I'd be concerned.
That's right. Okay. And then the last thing, I think that if the Menard store in its development wanted to include a monumental piece of art in its development, it would certainly be an asset to the community. I have no idea if you've even thought about that, but there's a trend right now in East Urbana to accentuate new construction with very handsome pieces that have brought beauty to the surroundings in the commercial setting. And Danielle had requested a bookstore. I'll put a request in for a cinema. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other comments, Danielle?
This will just be my second comment to this, which is I want to underline what Brandon said, and I think that it's really close, and because we aren't seeing some of the changes that might have come out of Plan Commission and Bike and Pedestrian Commission, maybe some of these have been taken care of, but basically these are the criteria to fix some of the sidewalk issues. Arterial streets should have sidewalks always. Criteria number 2, sidewalks shall be connected, no stubs. So every time you see a stub, that means there's something wrong. And there's a few strange ones like Michigan Avenue, right underneath that little pond that's near Michigan. There's just, it stops all of a sudden, and it's literally 3 houses. You'd have to go across the street if you were a kid on a tricycle, which doesn't make any sense. So you should just finish that off and go down Michigan, especially because Michigan is an arterial, or, it's kind of a collector street in that area. Definitely, sometimes I don't understand from looking at the maps that things are missing, and that means they're not going to happen, because I was thinking all along Washington is going to have of course we would have sidewalks on Washington. How could we not have sidewalks on Washington? It's going to be the major route to 130. So we should have sidewalks on Washington on both sides. As things develop, there should always be sidewalks on Washington. And then there's the little street P and M, which are in front of the businesses. And so the sidewalks go almost all the way around, and then there's just one side of the business that doesn't have a sidewalk, and that seems silly to me. It's a very small amount of cement, and that's a situation where we have something stubbing off. So there's a few little ones like that that I would say, but if you just use those 2 criteria, arterial streets and those collector streets should always have sidewalks, and because it's not just serving the neighborhood, it's serving the community as a whole, and the connected, streets should be connected, and there really shouldn't be stubs. If you clean up a few of the stubs that are here, I think we're good to go.
Other comments, Charlie?
Yeah, just a last item. Since you do have a lot of water features in here, I assume that, there's nothing really decided on what you're going to do. Native plantings, rain gardens. Has any thought gone into those sorts of things?
No, we were thinking about the water features internal to the residential development from an aesthetic standpoint, and if there's things that we can add or that would help from a marketing perspective as it relates to those. But as far as some of the other things that you mentioned, no, we haven't put a lot of thought or detail into that.
I assume that our city staff will keep that in more of the right-of-way areas and that sort of thing. I guess I would encourage you to look at some of these alternatives for integrating runoff into rain gardens and alternative things rather than just sending them straight to a detention pond. And that's another way to deal with big parking lots. It's something we're looking at in other areas of the city, and so some work's already been done, and of course the presentation was done earlier by SAA. Thank
Robert?
you very much.
Just wanted to mention one thing. Throughout this process, the phrase I've heard probably more than anything else is, we don't want to repeat North Prospect. And there's a couple of things I thought I would point out, and Bill touched on this briefly, but it's really, really important in that none of the properties, none of the parcels will have direct access onto Route 130 itself. They'll access off of side streets. And so there won't be any driveways coming from any of these properties onto Route 130. And that means, like, for instance, if you go on North Prospect out in front of Lowe's, there's a traffic light there just for the Lowe's parking lot driveway. And you find yourself, within 1 block, you've got 2 or 3 traffic lights. You go through one, then you sit the next one, and sit at the next one. The other thing I wanted to point out was, that's important. The other thing is, on North Prospect, because of the interstate, I think, everyone naturally uses the interstate and North Prospect going north, and so they have to create this marketing program to use other routes, like the Big Bad Bypass, and you've seen, they're doing brochures and kind of really marketing to get people to use other ways in and out. But here I think it'll just be natural in that people will be able to it'll be more dispersed, and that people can go Washington Street, Florida, Route 130, Route 150, Windsor Road. There'll be all these directions in and out. I think that will help disperse the traffic a lot too.
I think you left out one big piece was the pedestrian and bike issue, which, North Prospect, if you try to be a pedestrian or bicyclist, you're taking your life into your own hands. So that's being included in here in the flow. It just goes along with the whole idea of this thing is accessible in a number of different ways by a number of different methods of transportation, and that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. O'Neill, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you very much for inviting all of our input. And I think our main message is we're glad you're here in 2010.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, our next item is Resolution 2007-11-025R, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation, and I believe that will be Bill.
We had recently gone through a qualification-based selection process where we interviewed and consultants, reviewed a bunch of proposals, had a selection committee, and ended up selecting Clark Dietz for the consultant to do the design for the Goodwin Avenue improvements. We recently received a final proposal. We had gone through and critiqued it, the scope of work and the costs, and we are now comfortable with that scope and the costs to do the design for this project. And since there's federal funds involved with this project, we need to use a state of Illinois contract form which is attached, and a resolution that would authorize then us to enter into an agreement with IDOT and with the consultants. So it'd be a three-party type agreement. So we're looking for council approval of this.
Brandon?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we send it to council with a recommendation for approval.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye for moving this forward to council.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item, thank you, Bill, is ordinance number 2008-01-005, an ordinance amending section 1130 of the Urbana City Code concerning smoking. And I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Thank you. The city's current smoking ordinance establishes a 6-foot separation between places where smoking is prohibited and areas in which smoking is allowed. Since the ordinance was passed, the state of Illinois passed a statute specifying a 15-foot separation between the two areas. The proposed amendment would simply change the 6-foot separation requirement to a 15-foot separation requirement to coincide with the current state law. And basically its purpose is just to promote consistency in terms of enforcement and to eliminate any possibility of misunderstandings by people who are required to comply with the ordinance.
Thank you, Kurt. Dennis?
I can't believe that that the city of Urbana, the mean old city of Urbana, who passed a smoking ordinance about a year ago, which the state finally caught up with, actually had a more lenient ordinance. But I would make a motion that we change our ordinance and adopt the recommendations in ordinance number 2008-01-005, which changes the wording of the ordinance from 6 feet to 15 feet in front of any entrance, exit, window, open window, or air intake vent.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor indicate by saying...
Questions?
Oh, we have comments. Okay,
We got comments.
Charlie and then Brandon.
Yeah, Kurt, so the state statute doesn't require that we meet their minimum, essentially.
That's
Or-
correct.
So we're free to leave it at 6 feet if we really wanted to.
We can, and this is simply an effort to aid in enforcement, to prevent people from being trapped. As someone who could follow the ordinance, the letter of the law, absolutely, and still end up in state court for violating the state statute.
Okay, so
and they thought they were doing everything right to the letter.
Okay, so somebody who followed the city, so the city ordinance wouldn't take precedence over the state ordinance. The state ordinance does take precedence. That's the answer. Okay, yeah, if the state ordinance takes precedence, then, yeah, okay.
Any other comments or questions? We're ready for a vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. It passes and moves forward to council. And you guys, I think we adjourn. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good job.